Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Scrutiny Committee of the 15th September 2021. I want to apologise for the slight delay, but we had some gremlins in the system, but we wanted to make sure that everybody who needed to attend today could access proceedings. I'd like to also welcome members of the public and the press and representatives from our allies from Horsecross and Culture Perth and Kinross who are also in attendance today. Can I ask the committee officers if there are any substitutions or apologies?
Yes, morning, convener. We do have one substitution. Councillor Duff is substituting for Councillor Illingworth. And just a point of clarification, on the front of the agenda, it still has Councillor Robertson as a member of the committee. This was changed at the last meeting of the council, and it is Councillor Wilson who is in attendance today. Thank
you, Danny, and welcome to Councillor Wilson to the Scrutiny Committee, although I suspect with his long service, he may already have served on the Scrutiny Committee in the past. But I also would like to thank Councillor Robertson for his service to the committee previously. Thank you. Can we now move forward to the roll call, please? I'm sorry, Councillor McDade, do you have a point of order?
Yes, sorry, convener. I'm just wondering if the head of legal and governance could provide clarity. Previously, my understanding was that conveners of service committees were not allowed to be on the scrutiny committee. Councillor Duff has been appointed as convener of SPNR, so I'm just looking for clarity there.
He has indeed, Councillor McDade. Mr. Fogg, will you be able to provide us with some clarity on that? I think perhaps Councillor McDade may be correct.
Sorry, convener. I'm not aware of that provision. I can try and check, but I'm sorry, I can't answer it because it's not something I'm aware of.
Convener, I have checked with legal and governance. It doesn't include the convener of SPNR. Only lifelong learning, housing communities and E&I.
Thank you very much, Councillor Duff. Mr. Fogg, nevertheless, I would like you to be able to, for the minute, confirm that position so we can record it and address properly Councillor McDade's point of order. Thank you. Is that? Can we move on now, please? We're ready to move on. Thank you. Danny, can I ask now for a roll call to be taken?
Yes, convener. So, members, when I call your name, you can let me know whether you're present. Convener, we've heard from yourself, so Councillor Parrott. Present. Councillor Liz Barrett.
Present.
Councillor Harry Coates.
Present.
Councillor Jarvis.
Here.
Councillor Massey.
Present.
Okay. Councillor McDade.
Present.
Okay. Councillor Reid.
Present.
Okay. Councillor Sarwat.
Present.
Councillor Smith.
Present.
Councillor Stewart.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Duff, we've just heard from yourself as well. So that should be everyone present, convener.
Thank you very much. Now, have we any declarations of interest on any items on today's agenda? No declarations of interest. Thank you very much. Then before we move on to the main agenda for today, I just want to say to elected members that we have a very full agenda today. And while I will try and endeavour to move on expeditiously through each item and try to get the agenda completed today, we do have a fairly hard stop at 1 or 1:30, I think, because there are members of our officer team have commitments elsewhere. So if there are any items we don't get to, then I'm going to suggest that we carry them over to the next meeting or a special meeting to be held at a later point. We are the Scrutiny Committee. It's not for us to rubber stamp or just nod through papers that come before us. So I want to make sure that members of this committee have the appropriate opportunity to scrutinise fully any papers that are before us today. So I just thought I'd let you know that. So we can move on to the next item, please, which is the minute of the meeting of the Scrutiny Committee of the 9th of June 2021. Are there any corrections or matters arising from that? Councillor McDade, do you have a question on the minute?
Yes, Convener, just a quick question at point 3 on the minute, which is about the minute of the meeting of the 12th of May. It said that there would be an update brought forward to committee on at an early date on Abernite. I'm just wondering for the watching public if you can provide us with an update on how that's progressing.
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor McDade. Yes, this is a long-standing item. That, in fact, the other review that is pending on some governance arrangements for community groups, mainly due to the pandemic and the sterling effort that our officers have been giving to pandemic response. It means that we've not been able to move ahead with these as we would have liked. However, I have been assured that now we are getting back to hopefully some degree of normality, and perhaps hopefully also getting some access back into our offices and committee rooms, we can move ahead with that quite expeditiously. I do intend to update members more formally in the next 7 to 10 days. But thank you for your question, Councillor McDade. Thank you. Councillor Stewart, are there any other matter? You have a matter arising?
Yes, so it'll be good to get those scrutiny reviews of Abernite and local governance arrangements for local action partnerships underway, because obviously the greater the gap in time from when those Abernite issues arose, the less meaningful the learning that we might draw from a scrutiny review will become. Obviously, it was a commitment over a year ago that review panel was set up and given a scope and so on. So if you can update us in the next 7 to 10 days, that's great. I'm grateful for that. I'm particularly interested in when the outstanding issue on Business Gateway and the performance report for Business Gateway will be brought back by officers to committee, given that I think it was well over 2 years ago now that the commitment was made that we would be getting a final report on matters and also a performance report, a best value, if you like, for the public pound report on the over £1 million worth of Business Gateway spend. So I don't know if there are any officers here who can answer that or explain why we haven't had that report yet.
So thank you, Councillor Stewart, for your question. I did in fact ask for your question from the last Scrutiny Committee to be noted in the minute, and I noticed that it's not there. So I would ask Committee Services again to correct the minute to reflect that and the commitment that was made to you at the last meeting. I don't believe that officers are yet in a position to bring forward the information you've asked for or that was promised, but I will chase them up again and try and ensure that that's done expeditiously, and well before the next Scrutiny meeting, so that the information can be shared with all members of the Scrutiny Committee. Thank you for reminding us all of that, Councillor Stewart. Okay, if there are no other matters arising, can we now note the minute? I'll take silence as consent. Thank you very much. Now we move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is an update by our arm's length external organisations. We have here today from Horsecross, Nick Williams, Billy Anderson and Colin Hood, I believe, and from Culture Perth and Kinross, Helen Smout is in attendance. So if I can call first of all upon Fiona Robertson to introduce this item, and then we shall move on to questions and to the alios. Fiona?
Thank you very much, Convener. Good morning, councillors. Good morning, everybody. As usual, we have an update from Horsecross Arts on their financial position, which Nick Williams, Chief Executive, and Willie Anderson, Finance Director, will speak to, and also a particular welcome to Colin Hood, who took up his new role as Chair of Horsecross Arts earlier this year. There's been a lot of work going on within all our cultural organisations to build back their financial resilience and start getting audiences back into the venues that we all love so much. And I'm sure Nick and Willie and Colin will have some points to say about that. Also, Helen Smout, Chief Executive of Culture Perth Kinross, is going to talk about some particular aspects of COVID recovery and the role of the library service and some of the wider services that CPK are responsible for in terms of contributing to the health and well-being of our communities, reducing social isolation and dealing with some of the many other vulnerabilities that have arisen as a result of the pandemic. So Helen, I think you're going to present after Nick and Willie, and the finance update for Horsecross is first.
Apologies, I put myself on mute. Thank you very much, Fiona. Mr. Williams or Mr. Anderson, which of you is going to speak first from Horsecross?
It will be me, convener Nick Williams.
Hello, good morning, Nick. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. We'd just like to start, actually, if we can move on to the next slide, with just a brief overview of what we have been doing. Obviously, the buildings were legally closed for quite a long time during the pandemic, but we have attempted to engage with our audiences and communities as broadly as we could during that period. When the rules did change back in May, we were the first place in Scotland to welcome audiences back to live performance, albeit only 100 of them, with our partnership with Radio 3, and we did a short series of lunchtime concerts. We've been out and about as much as we can in fields and car parks and playgrounds and gardens with our Gig on a Truck project, where we worked with local artists and bands, visiting 40 care homes and 15 school and community locations across the whole of Perth and Kinross, from way up in the north right down to Kinross and all the way through the Cast as well. Very much designed to bring a bit of feel-good factor and to test audiences' willingness to come to events in a very controlled manner, and I'm pleased to say that it was a hugely successful programme. Our youth theatre came back to working in person in July and made an outdoor promenade show, and we did at the end of that month in early August a festival on the plaza for 6 days, where we had a mini fringe, if you like. Very much designed to test some thinking and some mechanisms for when we reopened the buildings, and certainly audiences were delighted that we had brought live performances back to the city centre. And then our conference programme restarted over the summer with two of our long-term and major local businesses hosting hybrid events within us, where they had a small live audience and otherwise broadcast their events online. Can we have the next slide, please? So our current situation as of this week, we reopened the concert hall on Saturday last, and the event's frequency starts to increase through the rest of this month and runs at just below normal levels through October and November, heading straight towards Christmas. The theatre will reopen next week with our first in-house production in 18 months, and the main stage programme will run as normal through the whole of the autumn, with a slightly reduced programme in the Joan Knight studio. You will have seen that we put the whole season on sale in August, and that does include a full panto, which I think you'll all agree is a hugely important civic event for the city. I will come back to panto in a short while. We've reopened a ticketing desk at the theatre at the end of August, and are now manning the phone lines in person on a daily basis as well. We have a range of rescheduled events through the autumn, some of which are very well sold because they were actually put on sale 2 years ago now. In-person participation has restarted this week with our youth theatre and glee programmes, following on from some of our adult participation work, which started in a phased manner in person over the summer. We have been, over the last few weeks, been rebuilding our staffing team to enable us to reopen, so recruiting visitor experience, technical operations personnel, We've done that in a phased way to manage the cost of it as we've started to build back to reopening. And on an internal basis, the programme of internal organisation development and governance work stemming from the difficulties in 2019, we are pleased to report that we are very well advanced in our work in that area, with around 80% of it now complete. And I very much hope to report to this committee at the end of the year that we'll have completed all of that programme of work. Can we have the next slide? I'll just hand to Willie Anderson now, who'll give you a financial update on where we're at.
Thanks, Nick. Hello, everyone. This is a slide here that went to our board last week. It was a review of our first quarter. And to be fair, I'll probably just draw your attention to the bottom right-hand corner, to that 32,000, which tells us that we did better than we thought we would. And that's probably not a comment financially that this group has heard in relation to Horse Cross for some time. The variance columns there, they're all small numbers. And that makes me, quite happy, and our planning and our forecasting is getting there. We're really getting on top of our expectations. I think the key things for me, we put a few things there in the blocks beside. The key thing there for me is the control on payroll, which is something that Nick and I inherited issues with that. But as you can see, we've actually got 11k of slippage there. We've planned appropriately and we've controlled it. The other thing I think I would bring to your attention is a specific pandemic issue, and that's energy. To keep airflow flowing through our buildings is really expensive because of the nature of the buildings, and I'm sure that many council buildings are having the same problem. So we're at about 25% ahead of our budget there, which on a kind of £250,000 annual budget, if that continues, is going to become material. Obviously, we hope that those requirements change as we go over the next few months. If we move to the next slide, please, we can look at where we are with annual budget. The budget has been revised on 3 occasions during the year. That was a decision made by our board that we would go quarter by quarter, but at the meeting last week we've now approved a budget for the rest of the financial year. There was a number of things that have impacted on the previous budget. On the positive side, we were successful in accessing a grant from the Performing Arts Venue Relief Fund. Again, following our £750,000 last year, we got another 333,700. But since the previous budget has been approved, the uncertainty around return had led to a number of shows cancelling or moving. And the impact there is in one of the green boxes. It was 170k off the bottom line, literally within a couple of months. We probably don't think that all the shows have stopped moving, but that process is almost complete, we think. We've had a couple move in the last couple of weeks. But it seems that promoters are now at least a standstill, assuming that everything's going to go ahead. Again, I hope that the committee is pleased to see that we are now able to forecast a very small surplus, again, with the caveat that obviously we've received some extraordinary funding during this year, as we did during last year. But we feel we have, for the time being, got ourselves onto a financially sustainable position.
Thank you, Willie. Can we move to the next slide, please? I think it was specifically requested to just have an outline of where we're at with our conferencing, events and hires programme. I think the sort of standard programme here was a little slow to restart after lockdown, and I think that was to do with an uncertainty around appetite for in-person events and what was permitted. But we are seeing and have seen over the summer an increase in inquiries for some of the smaller meetings for the second half of the year. Those that we do have in the diary so far are very much long-term clients who are very keen to bring back in-person events. We currently have 2 multi-day conferences booked in between now and March. So just looking at the value there, current booking total is worth £92,000 against the last full year of activity, which was 233. So that's about 40% of what a full year total would be at the 6-month point in the year. And you can see that the participant numbers are track almost identically against that, which I think is probably not too bad, actually, given where we're coming from in the pandemic. Based on current bookings and current levels of inquiry, we're projecting around an 80% level of activity on the 1920 figures for the next financial year, although obviously it's a very dynamic figure and there is work that we can do to further advertise and promote our facilities and to attract conference and events to the city. Can we move to the next slide, please? So we do have some ongoing challenges here, and the COVID-related challenge is the biggest one, really. We have a range of mitigations going on within the rules and the legislation across our buildings, both front of house and back of house, and within performing companies. And we are in constant dialogue with touring shows around what we require of them, and obviously highlighting that the rules are much stricter here in Scotland than they are in England for those tours that are coming up from down south. But there are some vulnerabilities within that, not least things like test to release has a 24-hour turnaround if someone is a close contact. And that could lead to last-minute cancellations if that tour is in Scotland. Rumours around circuit breaker lockdowns would also have a major negative financial impact because it would lead to full cancellation and no furlough support available, although it does feel like that is diminishing as a potential. You will have seen the press coverage on the vaccine passport conversation. We don't have the details of this yet. It will affect, as we currently understand it, it will affect standing performances only, of which we have 2 during the autumn, both of which are nearly entirely sold out. So once those details are complete, we will have a job of work to communicate to those audiences what they need to do to allow access to our buildings. But if it's a long-term measure, then clearly it could have an effect on ticket sales. And then finally, in terms of audience, it's a little too early to say what the audience patterns will be, or even whether with rearranged shows people will actually use those tickets. We have anecdotal evidence from England, where the performing arts sector has been open for several months now, that ticket sales are late. And indeed, we did see a surge of tickets in the last couple of days before Scottish Opera's performance on Saturday at the concert hall. We do have our first sold-out show on Saturday night in the hall, and some of those shows in the autumn are incredibly well sold. And then there are others that are a little less well sold, and we're trying to work out what the pattern really is here. Obviously, in terms of our financial model, the Panto is our biggest risk that we take every year. And we have formally requested that Perth Kinross Council consider underwriting that show in case there are challenges around some of the issues, things like test to release, which could shut down the show for 24 hours. And we're in dialogue around that at the moment. Just to give you a sense of the numbers, it costs about £197,000 to put on a panto and run it for 6 weeks, and we're looking to take around £225,000 in ticket income. So it is a significant chunk of our annual budget. In terms of sales at the moment, Panto is tracking on trend, so it went on sale in August, and it's following the usual pattern. We would expect to see the sales to start to grow at a roughly 10 weeks out of the show starting, and that's roughly the beginning of October. So you will start to see the marketing for Panto appear in increasing frequency over the coming weeks. Go on to the final slide, please. I believe we're also asked to just talk about what our strategic priorities are for the next 12 months, and clearly ensuring that we reopen our venues in a safe and sustainable manner has been our major focus, and we will continue to tweak how we operate in both of our buildings as both the COVID security measures evolve, and how we need to keep an eye on our costs and our cost control. On the sort of other side of it, the sort of organisational side, we're about to embark on a redevelopment of the vision and mission for Horsecross, and the viable operational plans that therefore support the delivery of those things. I don't think that they've been examined internally for quite some time, and it feels like a ripe moment to re-articulate what it is that we're here to do and how we contribute to the city and our communities. We will, as I mentioned earlier, continue our organisational development programme to promote a financially sustainable model and a successful delivery of the programme. And obviously all of that will be underpinned by a new 3-year business plan, which we will work on over the next coming period of months, and hope to sign off by this time next year. Thank you all very much. If anyone would like to ask any questions, then I'm very happy to respond.
Thank you, Nick and Willie. So yes, I'll open it up now to questions. Can you please put a Q in the chat box if you want to ask a question, please? Okay, Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, convener. It may be a question for council officers rather than for yourself, Mr. Williams or Mr. Anderson. But what is the route for a decision to be taken on the underwriting of the pantomime costs, and when will that decision be taken, and by whichever route it is, maybe it would be the SP&R committee, and really when do you need the answer back by, Mr. Williams, as well? Because obviously taking on that responsibility and knowing that it's underwritten is one thing, but you know, if there was no underwriting of it, then that might have a decision on the go ahead. But somebody could clarify that.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Thank you for the question. So as you say, the route for considering an underwriting request is SP&R. You may have seen in the last SP&R excuse me, report that we did briefly highlight the ongoing issues for all 3 ALIOs, just in terms of recovery from COVID, and the request from Horsecross vis-a-vis the Panto, which, as Nick says, is a really big part of the business model for the year, is one of those requests. We are working through with Willie what the underpinning revenue assumptions are for the Panto, just in terms of the council's own due diligence. Clearly the Panto is important and we all want to make good stuff happen where we can, but we need to understand a little bit more about the revenue expenditure and the forecast income, which Nick's mentioned. There is also the matter of the, and again, Nick and Willie mentioned this, Horsecross has received second tranche of emergency funding from the Scottish Government Relief Fund for performing arts venues. Now that money, as I understand it, can't be used to fund activity that Horsecross would be delivering anyway through its core funding. It's for additional activity, but clearly it does shore up the financial position, at least for the short term. We will bring something to next SPNR, but as Nick said, we are in very detailed dialogue with him and his colleagues about this issue at the moment.
Thank you.
Just to follow up quickly, we had SPNR committee 2 weeks ago, so it wouldn't be due until I think November, if I'm right, Mrs. Robertson. So is that enough? My question was, is that enough time in order to allow the scheduling of the panto?
The Horsecross board has already taken the decision to go ahead with the panto.
Okay, thank you.
And as Nick and Willie have outlined for committee, Horsecross's financial position at the moment is stable. Nick is fairly optimistic about ticket sales, but we do need to see, and his point about late purchase of tickets and the impact of the vaccine passport are key unknowns at the moment. If things reached a critical point in terms of the financial viability of the panto, then we would obviously talk with committee services about executive sub SPNR, but at the moment my view is that November is all right time-wise.
Okay, thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Nick. Fiona Sarwar, Councillor Sarwar, you have a question?
Thank you, convener. Yeah, just a small question about, you talked about the gradual opening of the interactive kind of theatre clubs that you've had adults, and then it's going to go into children. I just wondered if you've had any occurrence of positive COVID tests and whether people have had to isolate, and whether that's affected the programme. Thanks.
No, that's a really good question. No, so far so good. So when the Youth Theatre made their outdoor show in person in July, they rehearsed it outside to mitigate that risk. The adult programmes have started with our very focused and targeted ones. So things like Dance for Parkinson's and Vocal Cord, which is a project for those that have breathing difficulties or issues that were all done in a socially distanced manner. Willie mentioned the airflow costs, and it's because that we started these projects in the buildings that the airflow was, it was on full pelt to help mitigate. Our staff are all encouraged to do twice weekly lateral flow testing, and we have a record of people's vaccination status as well, because obviously that dictates how we respond in terms of the legal pathway. So at present, our mitigations are working, and we have not had any outbreaks of COVID amongst the staff or our participants.
Thank you. That's great news.
Thank you, Nick, for that answer. Are there any other questions from members before I ask mine? Okay, thank you. So I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, I just want to reassure that I have rearranged tickets for a show and I fully intend to use them. So hopefully I'm not alone in that regard. I am curious to know that how much of our ticket sales are tied up with rearranged tickets, because ours have been rearranged since, I think, goodness me, at least 18 months, and probably we won't use them till sometime next year. Yeah, so I'm just curious how much of your forward ticket sales are tied up in almost like legacy sales.
It's a dynamic picture, actually. So this time last year, when we received the first tranche of venue relief funding, that figure stood at around £430,000 worth of sales. Now, over the intervening period, that number has gone down because shows have cancelled and we've issued refunds. Willie, I don't know if you have a current figure based on the most recent set of redevelopment or reschedules, but it's the amount of money that we sit on in prepaid ticket income it changes on a daily basis, of course, because of the amount of sales that happen. But perhaps you have a more accurate current figure.
I don't have a figure that relates purely to long-standing postponements. I can say that as of last week, that the overall advanced ticket sales, but remember that includes tickets that have just gone on sale for shows that are happening next few months, is about 600k, and that's not unusual in terms of cash flow overall.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. So I thank you very much. So I also want to thank you for bringing forward a bit of an update on the conferences. I asked for that to be brought forward, so thank you for that. I have a number of questions surrounding that. And I'm pleased to see that you also said that you consider part of the work of Horsecross to contribute to cities and communities. And obviously, as we start to come out of, hopefully, current restrictions and get back into a more what might look like a normal way of working, then obviously the impact of conferences on our overall economic well-being in the city in terms of hotels, etc., is quite important. So I'm curious to know what, if any, regular bookers of conferences that you're aware of have chosen to move elsewhere.
I'm not sure we would necessarily know if they've gone elsewhere. It's very much to do with whether they've booked us or not. Our conference team are in dialogue with all of those regular bookers, and some of them are quite cyclical, so that they move around, and you know, what that cycle will look like subsequently, I don't know. It's, you know, some of them take a year and they want a year in advance bookings, and some of them are much more dynamic. So I don't have a list, I'm afraid, of exactly who is booked in front of me and who is inquiring at the moment.
Yeah, perhaps if that's possible, maybe, you know, Fiona and I know Alison Seggy is here. It would be helpful, perhaps the next time you come before this committee, to try and have perhaps a bit rounded look to see what is the economic development impact. I know, for example, I mean, I've been contacted by a staff member of the STUC to tell me that it's with some reluctance that they've cancelled their booking here and have indeed booked elsewhere because of some changes to the way staff relations have been arranged within Horsecross. Now, that's a matter for you, but there's obviously an economic, the opposite of benefit to Perth City as a consequence. And so I'm just wondering if there's some way that we can assess what that is on a general basis, perhaps also more specifically, and if indeed there's any knock-on effect from decisions such as theirs.
You know, I think economic development impact is one of the things that we're very keen on looking at across all of our strands of activity. In terms of that particular booking, it's unfortunate that they've chosen to take that elsewhere, but as you say, that's an internal management issue ultimately.
Councillor Convener, Councillor McCall, Alison Seggy and I can pick up on your question about economic impact. There have been economic impact assessments of the concert hall, including the business tourism part of the business, so conferences and events and so on. That's not been done for some time. But I'm happy to look out the information that we do have and circulate that to the committee after today.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful, and I think perhaps you know, when we look at conference bookings in particular, and in fact other types of events, we can start having a look at the economic impact in the round, not just internally to Horsecross, but to the wider city in particular, that really does need additional focus, I think, and recovery as we come out of this. I'm happy to take anything else offline that's perhaps internal, and I'll work with you, Fiona, on that. It's just somebody contacted me, and perhaps it's well, they contacted me directly in my role as convener of Scrutiny, and nevertheless, I think it's important that we all share with each other if there are knock-on benefits from internal management operational issues that perhaps might not have been understood or assessed at the time. So certainly, Fiona, I'll pick that up with you and we can take it forward. If that's acceptable, so thank you. So if there are no other questions, then I would thank Nick and Willie and was Colin here?
Yes, convener Colin is here, but I think he's on a view only invite rather than an ability to speak invite. Okay, well, in that case, thank you, Colin, for your view only attendance, and thank you also to Nick and Willie for attending and answering our questions today. And I look forward to seeing you at the next scrutiny meeting. Thank you. Thank you very much. So now we will invite and welcome Helen Smout from Culture Perth and Kinross. Helen, are you here? I did see you earlier.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
Yep. Morning.
Helen, good morning. Fiona, do you want to introduce Helen, or can Helen go straight to her presentation?
I think Helen will probably want to go straight to her presentation.
Thank you both. Helen, the floor is yours.
Yes, great. Thank you, convener and committee. I'll just wait for the slides to appear on the screen. I'm certainly not seeing them, but they may be there at your end. But I will start by saying thank you for the opportunity. There we go. Thank you for the opportunity to give you an update, and a bit like Horse Cross, our colleagues before us, we're seeing a slow and steady return to something like pre-pandemic life. So I'll start my presentation with a bit of an update on that, and then focus in on some of the issues around libraries, which I know the committee have expressed an interest in. I'm very happy to take questions at the end, or if anybody wishes to follow up on any aspect of the presentation after the meeting, please do. Next slide, please. As I reported previously to the committee, I think back in May, we have again been undertaking a phased reopening of our venues and public-facing services. We currently have 8 of 13 libraries open. Our 3 mobile libraries are fully operational, and all 3 of our museum and gallery venues have also opened. This means that at the moment we've got about twice the amount of service provision open than we were able to open this time last year. So we're much further down the line than we might previously have been. Next slide, please. So although returning customers are clearly delighted to be back, and they report they feel safe and confident in the COVID measures that we have in place, we are seeing, as I say, some slow return, particularly in library usage. Our schools are only accessing campus libraries at the moment, out with public opening times, just to try and keep public and school pupils separate, although I know we'll review that after the October holidays. I've given you here the August data as a good example of the continuing impacts of the on levels of attendance of the pandemic. And you'll see for our museums, we're doing around 60% of what we were doing pre-pandemic. At Perth Museum and Art Gallery. At the Ferguson Gallery, which is also open, we're near the 79%. We had 912 visitors in August, and we would normally see about 1,100 visitors. And at Ayleth Museum, we have 84% of our pre-pandemic customer back. Neither of these museums were able to open last summer, as I've said. We know that generally, we're doing very well with returning customers on the museum side of things, although we're not back where we would like to be. Over this summer in particular, we have been faring well against the national picture and against other local national attractions, which are sitting at around 40%, although that does vary from venue to venue. We have had a reduced opening, so in 2019 we were 6 days a week for the summer season, and this year we've been 5 days a week. So if we take that into account, we're faring even slightly better at PMAG. On the library side of things, we are seeing very varied return across all 8 venues. It does depend on each locality. However, overall it's about 33% for AK Bell, and in particular, we only had AK Bell and Blairgowrie open last year, so there's no comparative data for last summer there. So that's a bit disappointing. We know that people have found alternatives to library use during lockdown, but we would like to see more of our communities engaging with the services. Next slide, thank you. As well as our venue openings, we are focusing very much, like Horse Cross colleagues, on re-engaging with audiences in order to encourage them back into venues and back into our services. Our Suitor Festival, which we undertook all online for the first time in April, we attracted audiences not just locally, but from New Zealand, from Canada, from Europe. We also got all 4 UK nations present. Our pop-out summer programme has very much been about taking the events and activities we might normally have in our venues out onto the streets, recognising that many people are still reluctant to participate in indoor events and activities. And that's been very generously supported by a grant from the Council's events budget. We're also beginning to re-engage with in-person book bug and rhyme time sessions. I'm particularly pleased about this, as we know that many parents and carers, particularly first-time parents, had a difficult experience of pregnancy and early parenthood during lockdown. And our book bug sessions are an excellent place for people to build social relationships and support networks in the local community with other people who are in the same circumstances. And we're certainly seeing a lot of relief and pleasure in parents' faces as they come back to sessions and start to talk to other people and realise that what they're seeing with their baby one-to-one is actually what other people are seeing with their baby. And a lot of that type of interaction was lost during lockdown. We've continued to work with our volunteers. During lockdown and for last year, we took on running our Books on Wheels service, which was previously delivered by volunteers from the RVS. But we've now been working with RVS to put these volunteers back into operation. They're delighted to be back and supporting people who cannot leave their home to access services another way for whatever reason. Got around 114 volunteers. Many of those were able to continue to work with us during lockdown. We had quite an innovative volunteer programme called My Museum, where we had people who were able to work on collections research from home and online, and we did extensive training for volunteers online as well. We've also been continuing to provide placements and work opportunities for young people. In particular, we're very keen and see it as part of the kind of CPK DNA, is about offering the opportunities we have to as many people as possible and encouraging people to consider a career or work in the culture and heritage sector. We've been able to do this through a combination of having online placements and working with Perth College UHI on online foundation apprenticeships, work placements, and this work is supported by funding from the Ganachie Trust. Thank you. Next slide, please. We've also had to engage in new ways. We've been extending our online presence, and the pandemic has certainly accelerated some of this work for us and our use of digital platforms. In 2020-21, we delivered more than 50 digital events and had more than 33,500 participants in those events during the pandemic year. 88% of those events were live streamed, which is new technology to all of us. And not without its challenges, but certainly has been very positively received by audiences. We've also launched 2 new websites in the last 12 months. CPK Museums, which is on the right there, hosts exhibitions, online exhibitions, which are exclusive and not available in venue, and also additional content for in-venue exhibitions, which means that we can add a richer experience for people who maybe visit in venue or give something exclusive to people who are unable to come to our venues. The site launched with material linked to the City Hall project, which was curated by volunteers during the lockdown. Our CPK Play website is for teachers, parents, carers and children, and has a wealth of education and learning resources and material which can be used in the classroom, in the home, or just for fun. And it is very much a work in progress. We continue to add content to that, linked to new exhibitions or collections and new projects which we run. The site has been featured as a work of good practice in Museums and Galleries Scotland at a national level, and is currently shortlisted for a Family Friendly Museum Award. It's the second time we've been shortlisted for these awards, so we're hopeful, our fingers are crossed for an October positive news. However, we do kind of feel like winners because this is an award that's nominated by families and users of the site, so we're very pleased with that. Next slide, thank you. So in terms of reopening issues generally, like Nick, we don't know yet what further impacts on footfall and engagement we may see over the winter months. For many people, this makes planning challenging. We've had to operate in a very agile and reactive way to keep services operational. And this includes at the moment training staff from other service areas how to deliver frontline provisions so that we can ensure business continuity in the face of potential illness or in self-isolation. I'm fortunate to have an excellent and skilled board supporting the service and a committed and enthusiastic staff team. However, I have to say, as we go into the winter months, I can see how tired people are. They're drained by constant uncertainty and change. It's very easy to close a service. It's very difficult to reopen one. And to do this not just once, but twice in the last year has taken huge reserves of energy and resilience. And I really commend everybody that works in the organisation for their tremendous work and their focus on communities. Next slide, please. Thank you. I'll go on now to talk a wee bit about our library services in particular, as I know that's an area of interest, and how they support renewal and recovery and can take things forward. We know libraries are valued in this country generally and are seen as symbols of evidence of civil and democratic society. However, the last 18 months have really highlighted just how vital a role they can play in the lives of individuals. There are two quotes here on your screen, which are from customers returning to the AK Bell Library last summer, and really just underpin for us and for staff the vital role that libraries can play. However, library use is changing. You know, we live in a changing society, and the pandemic has sped the pace of change like no other period in time, I suspect. And if I can move on to the next slide, I'll show you some evidence of that. During lockdown, we took some time to review data from the last 10 years of library provisions, so up to the point of the pandemic. Some of these figures may seem surprising or even shocking. However, they reflect the societal change which is happening over the same period. And whilst there's been a significant reduction in traditional library use, there's also been a corresponding change in the use of digital and online services. And while one doesn't replace the other, it's important to understand that that's in place. People use their libraries for many things, and attendance, as I've said before, does vary very much from community to community. But the difficult reality is fewer people are coming through the doors. The people who do come in to study, to work, to access local history, to undertake research. They come to access health information, to use the Wi-Fi, to print forms, to access emails, to access their benefits, and to undertake job applications online. They come to meet friends, to participate in a group activity, to attend reminiscence sessions or a talk, to learn something, to access information online, or just to sit in a welcoming and safe space. All these activities contribute to well-being, good mental health, and support employability. And in terms of the online use, just to understand that a wee bit better, during the last year, we've seen a significant uplift in e-library use, as you would expect, 118% increase in the use of e-books, and 68% uplift in the use of e-audiobooks. However, e-book issues are just 23,687. So that still is less than 10% of our overall book issues. So it is a growing but still small part of what we do and how we engage with people. So the remaining people are very much engaged with our physical resources. There is a difference there between active borrowers. So an active borrower is somebody who has borrowed a book or an item from a venue or from one of our mobile libraries. And our active users are the people who come in to our buildings, not just to borrow books, but also to use our Wi-Fi or our People's Network computers, and to make use of the other services and resources that are in the library. And around 10% of those active users actually don't necessarily come into a building, but they are active online and engaging with the services that we have there. So if I could move on to the next slide, thanks. So we are working to understand how our communities are changing, what the impact of the pandemic has been, what that story of changing use from the last 10 years is telling us, and asking ourselves some questions. What do our communities need from us now, and what might they need from us in the future, and how can we get them to better influence and inform what we do? How can we deliver that? Who can we work in partnership? How do we balance needs with resources? And really importantly, what will we stop doing because it's either no longer required or viable? I'll move on to the next slide. Thank you. So these are just some really interesting snippets from a myriad of research around libraries and their role in the recovery process and their impact during the pandemic. And there's two from this slide that I would particularly pick out for the committee. And the first is that reading for just 6 minutes a day can reduce stress levels by 68%. And that's quite an astonishing figure, but I'm sure most GPs even would recognise that. And we do have a books on prescription service where reading is prescribed by GPs. And the second of that is that 59% of young people surveyed by the National Literacy Trust said that reading made them feel better during lockdown. I think sometimes there's an assumption that young people don't engage in reading for pleasure, and they may not always pick up a physical book, but they are reading online. They are making use of ebooks and e-magazines in particular. And you know, that's a very heartening figure for us, that young people are still engaged in reading and are still looking for opportunities to access these resources. So if I could move on to the next slide, thank you. So some of the resources that we have in place which support well-being are there before you. These support individuals to manage their own conditions or to understand better conditions of those around them. They empower them to take some control of their own recovery journey, and they give them confidence to question and discuss their needs with health professionals. And in a large part, this is why the NHS can make that saving through public library use that you saw in the previous slide. In response to the pandemic, we're making more of these resources and developing a new health and wellbeing hub, firstly at the AK Bell, and that will be rolled out across other libraries. The hub will provide access to information, resources, and will host health promoting classes and events in partnership with community partners such as PCAFs and the NHS. They'll be able to access, individuals will be able to access that without needing to speak to anyone, so they can look up information and resources about something that may concern them without doing the Google Doctor thing, which often terrifies people rather than helps them. And they'll be able to use that space as somewhere to sit in quiet contemplation if they wish to as well. And I'll just move on to our next slide, please. Thank you. Our first hub will be launched in October, and we'll be running a creative writing for health course with our partners PCAFs and an author from Stirling area. We'll be hosting an open day inviting health and social care professionals and representatives from community groups to see the resources and opportunities the library could offer them and which we have available for their use. We will make sure that we are also asking them what else we can do how we can make the access easier and better for the people that they work with, and how we might be able to work in partnership to better improve outcomes in this area for young people, as well as our wider community. In addition to these wellbeing resources, we also have a wealth of other initiatives and activities to support other aspects of recovery and living in a world fundamentally altered by the pandemic. These include our hublets, maker spaces, wireless printing, which we're just about to roll out, spaces for worker study, free fast Wi-Fi, which if anybody's had to work from home, you cannot underestimate the benefit of Wi-Fi, and for many families in Perth Kinross, they did not have that in place at home. And of course our culture and heritage pathway, which I've mentioned before. And I just want to say a few words about things like the hublets. So these are new tablets which we've introduced into our AK Bell library, and we'll be rolling out to a further 5 sites. The tablets mean that people can have an online meeting. So if they're being interviewed for a job, for example, and they don't have access to an online platform at home or have broadband that's sufficient, they can come into the library, book a private space and use a hublet to have that interview. It allows people to sit in a space anywhere in the library at all and look at our e-newspapers and magazines, and it can be used for group activities. So we can have a tutor off-site and a group of individuals who are using the hublets on-site. So they're very flexible resources, and increasingly that's what we're trying to bring to the library, the flexibility in how we use the space and how others can use the space, and a flexibility in the infrastructure and the resources that support that. Our maker spaces are creative digital hubs which have cutting edge technology, and again it will be useful for people who are developing creatively, who want to develop new digital skills, who perhaps just want to take up a hobby or an interest in order to help support their well-being. Spaces for work or learning have become increasingly popular, and we have a booking system at the moment as part of our COVID measures, but we are seeing a lot of people who are working from home who come in to use the library perhaps for half a day or a day a week in order just to get out of the house and have a different environment from which to work remotely. And that will become increasingly important as people move to a model of much more blended working, and people don't always want to work in an office, but equally they don't want to be isolated from the rest of the world in their back bedroom or study. So there's a lot of opportunity in what our library services offer, and we are working to make the most of those. Nationally, a new national strategy for libraries was launched at the end of August. And it's very much focused on community needs and engagement with communities, and how libraries can work in partnership with others to deliver on all of the priorities that we have going forward. And I've highlighted here just one of 15 strategic aims across 3 areas which that strategy has, which I think is most pertinent to the work that we're doing at the moment. So if we can move on just to my last slide, thank you. In terms of priorities going forward now, as I've said, re-engagement is very, very much at the forefront of what we're doing. We need to continue to encourage our customers to come in and access the services. As a really small example, it's estimated that the average library user saves £98 a month through their library use. So for many people for whom the pandemic has had an economic impact, then the libraries offer them a resource and a route to accessing participation in an increasingly online world that may otherwise be out of their financial reach. So we're keen to continue that re-engagement, not just with communities, but with our stakeholders. How can we work more in partnership to deliver on recovery? We'll be developing a new strategic operating plan, and our board have an away day at the end of this month to start that process. And that's about taking the learning from the last 18 months, the changes that we're seeing in activity, and starting to build forward for the next 3 years. So there's a lot of activity there, a lot that we're keen to do, and a lot that I hope the committee can see that we're making a difference for in the communities. I'm happy now just to move to the last slide and take any questions which people may have.
Thank you very much, Helen. That was a very comprehensive report. I'm getting an echo on the line here, so perhaps that's cleared up. So thank you very much, Helen. That was very helpful and very interesting, particularly the information about the well-being emphasis going forward. And I'm also very pleased to see that the Sutra Festival went so well. Of course, William Sutra's home is in my ward, as it is for a couple of other councillors here in this committee as well. And I have attended the Sutra Festival before in his home. So I think it's fantastic that it's gone online and that it had such a wide participation, not just here in Perth, but globally. So let's hope that continues on going forward, and perhaps it's a opportunity to think about more of the cultural history of Perth and Kinross that we can treat in the same way and open up to a wider audience. So that is very welcome. So thank you for that. I'll open up now to questions, if I may. Councillor Massey, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Helen, for your report. I agree with you that the importance of our local libraries to the public in Perth and Kinross. My question is, are all of the Perth and Kinross libraries now open? And if any aren't, why is this?
Yeah, so thank you. So at the moment, we don't have all of our libraries open. We have a network of small single staff libraries, 5 of those, and we've not been able to reopen those as yet because we've had to work in a very different way as a result of COVID. We've had to redeploy staff into other roles and into other areas of the service in order to manage safe working practices during the pandemic itself. However, we are now in a position where we're moving towards reopening of these libraries. They may not all reopen in exactly the same number of hours and days a week just yet that they were before. They're very small sites. We still have to maintain social distancing and work activities that place additional pressures, not just financial pressures, but resourcing pressures in terms of staffing. But from November, you will start to see those small libraries reopening across the region.
Thank you for that.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Massey?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, please? Well, I would make the same. Well, thank you. There doesn't seem to be any more questions, Helen. It's a very comprehensive report, so perhaps that's why there's very few questions. I would make a comment, the same comment I made about Horsecross in terms of our economic well-being and economic recovery within the city. Obviously, our cultural offerings has a big impact on that. So perhaps when we're looking at those, the wider economic impact can be included, and you know, you can work with Fiona and her team to try the next time you come forward to just say what the potential impact is, either negative or positive, so at least this committee can see what's going on. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you for your attendance here today.
Thank you very much to you and the committee. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so now for the next 2 items on the agenda, Councillor Parrott will take the chair. So I will hand over to Councillor Parrott. Thank you, Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, everyone. The next item on our agenda is paper 5, the Perth and Kinross Council Annual Performance Report for 2020-2021. And before I hand over to Charlene Guild, who will introduce this paper, I'd simply like to make the comment that, of course, this report covers a year that was totally impacted by the COVID pandemic. And therefore, I think comparison with previous years from this report should be made very carefully. Thank you. Charlene, can I call on you to introduce the paper? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parrott, and good morning, councillors. I'm pleased to present our annual corporate performance report for 2020-21. This has been a unique year for reporting for many reasons, the main one being the coronavirus pandemic, which impacted on everything we do, including how we have delivered services, and information around the impact of COVID is reflected as an appendix. It is also the first time, due to committee timings, that our service, BMIPs, will be presented simultaneously to Scrutiny Committee. Once approved and comments taken on board, the corporate APR will then go on to be presented at full council on the 6th of October 2021. A few areas that we would like to highlight within the APR are the report clearly follows a simple format and is designed around our 5 strategic objectives. You will see that for ease of reference, we have highlighted our key achievements in each area with easy to read infographics. In line with our other key corporate reports over the past year, we have used plain English where possible, although you will appreciate the amount of specific service detail that needs to be included within the APR can make this a challenge. We have also followed our guidelines for simple, clear text and layout, which includes bullet points and colour coding where appropriate. You may notice that a summary with highlights of the specific objectives has not been included this year. This is deliberately due to the uniqueness of the year and the restrictions we have all experienced over the past 18 months. However, following the council meeting on the 6th of October, we will produce a video presentation format summary which we will make available publicly. We have also highlighted the key performance indicators at the end of each section. However, these have not been ragged as the comparisons this year will be skewed, and this approach has been approved by our auditors. For example, due to COVID restrictions, access to our sport and leisure facilities over the year could not be compared with previous years. This has been discussed with our services and agreed. As I briefly mentioned, in addition to the report, we felt it important to acknowledge the uniqueness of the past year. Highlighting the support to communities over and above the day-to-day service delivery, we have also shone a spotlight on the many areas of work that were required around the pandemic and specifically ensuring that the most vulnerable in our society were kept safe and protected. Appendix 1 sets out the difference our support has made to communities and how we will take what we have learned forward into the future. We are pleased to present this report and welcome your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlene. Can I call for questions to be put in the chat, if there are any? That's the first question appearing now. Councillor Liz Barrett, please.
Thank you, Deputy Convener. I'm going to say generally I found it a bit fiddly to have to check the performance figures online when I was looking at the paper, and I think it would have been helpful if these had been incorporated. Just a few points. On page 59, can you confirm when the local full fibre network will be implemented? It's been mentioned in quite a few of the reports today.
Charlene, are you able to pick up on that?
I will just check and see. I think Alison Seggy has put that she will be able to pick up on this point.
Thank you, Alison.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett, for the question. Yes, it's a very active project as we speak. We are digging up the ground and implementing the fibre project. We hope to have the project finished in full by probably the end of November, the current indications are. We have had a few issues on site with one of the contracts. However, we hope to be back on track within the next couple of weeks, and it will definitely be finished by the end of the calendar year, if not before.
That's very welcome, because it should make a huge difference, and it'll be good to be just enhancing our digital ability. Thank you for that. Also on pages, if no one else has questions, on pages 68.
Please go on, Councillor Barrett. No
on pages 68 and 69, these analyses are headed costs 1 and costs 2, shown as a percentage, but I couldn't see another reference to costs 1 and 2. And I thought it would be more meaningful if they were presented as figures totaling perhaps the 471.2 million on the previous page. Can anybody explain that one, please? That's pages 68 and 69.
I'm just wondering if one of our finance colleagues. around.
Councillor Barrett, could you give the page reference? I take it that you're giving the page reference from the...
on the papers, yes. It's pages 52 and 53 on the annual report, Karen.
Yeah. Thank you.
There's a pie chart on page 51, and then it just says cost 1 and cost 2, and there's a bar chart on its side, and it just didn't make any sense to me.
Councillor Barrett, I'll aim to get a response to you back to committee. I'll need to have a look at that just now. I'm just getting to the page, and rather than have you waiting for me to do that, I'll come back to you. And Councillor Barrett, if that's okay, I'll let you know when I have a response to that.
Thanks, Karen. It's certainly it would be helpful, I think, if there were figures there. At the moment, it simply shows, if you like, relative proportions, and it could be more. It might be more useful. Thank you. Can I ask if there are any other questions on this report? Yes, Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you, Deputy Convener. I'm sorry, it's a question. It's just slightly comment as well. I suppose I read this report with the statistic in the headline that I'm sure we've all seen about the 1 in 3 people in Perth and Kinross are either in or on the edge of poverty, and I did feel that although obviously there's plenty of references, especially to how we're trying to bridge the attainment gap for the poverty attainment gap in education and various other things, I wondered whether really we might benefit from being a little bit more explicit about that and just really having that front and centre in the priorities. But my question is on page 55 of the appendix. It is the somewhat bleak statistics of how people have been affected, and BAME workers, 12% out of parents are more likely to have lost 20% of their income, and it mentions in the report that this will need to be closely monitored and met with tailored responses through recovery plans. I just wondered if a bit more could be said, or if we can have an indication of when we would be able to see that tailored response.
Again, I think that comment was made in reaction to individual comments or individual circumstances rather than our Recovery and Real report. But of course, our Perth and Kinross offer will be dealing with some of these things in terms of the work streams that we're taking forward.
Sorry, I just feel a little bit that I often get this response when I ask questions, that it will be in the Perth and Kinross offer, and I don't imagine that this is this golden sort of, you know, fix all thing. And so I'm just wondering if you are actually able to give more of an answer of when we would actually be able to see a tailored response, a recovery plan. Thanks.
Thanks, Fiona. I think Sheena Devlin wants to come in with a response here.
Thank you. Councillor Parrott and Councillor Sarwar, you raise a very important point. We are required as a local authority, as you will know, to produce a child poverty action plan and report every year, and so I think that some of the detail of that you're rightly asking for today, you will see feature in the next iteration of our child poverty plan. Now, unfortunately, Claire Mailer is not in the committee today, but what I can do is ensure that I will provide you with the detail of when the next iteration of that more detailed plan is to be written, made available, and inform the entire committee of when that will be coming for consideration, if that's acceptable to you.
Thank you for that, Sheena, and I think Alison also wants to contribute.
Yes, just on some of the employability actions, we do have a number of actions underway, Councillor Sarwar, to target particularly families and working parents through a Scottish Government funded thing called Parental Employment Support Fund. So we have a couple of officers particularly targeting individuals in the communities and families to support them with particularly skills training grants and support to find employment, etc. We have our recruitment incentives, and we are looking at developing some skills academies. So there are a number of actions that are either underway or planned, and these are all set out also within the economic wellbeing plan. If you wish, I can maybe prepare a more detailed briefing that we can share with the rest of the committee, if that would be helpful. But there certainly are a number of actions in terms of supporting people back into work, and to help families who are in poverty, particularly those in work poverty as well, to improve their life situations, etc. So there is plenty of work underway, and we have some additional funding from Scottish Government that we are currently working on how we actually spend that.
Thank you for that. And I think Fiona Robertson also wants to come in here.
Yes, thank you, Vice Convener. Just briefly to build on what Sheena and Alison have said, Margaret Lynch, our Child Poverty Action Officer, is working on the update of the plan at the moment, and Councillor Sarwar's question, as others have said, is really spot on, because the impact of poverty is affecting all sorts of communities of geography and interest in different ways. So, for example, Councillor Sarwar, we're just looking at the impact of COVID and additional poverty on children's ability to participate in extracurricular sport, which is, you know, very much part of the picture in terms of how their long-term life chances, confidence, etc., will be affected. So I am aware that detailed work is going on to update the Child Poverty Action Plan, and that will go through the community's SMT and then come to committee thereafter.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sarwar, do you want any final comments before we move on?
No, well, thank you for those more complete answers, and I think a briefing would be fantastic. And obviously that key piece is the child poverty, absolutely, but as it mentions there, it's about how our BAME citizens and youth and young parents have been specifically affected, and so I'd really appreciate the briefing to cover, you know, that full spectrum and not just child poverty. But thank you, that's great.
Thank you very much. Now a question from Councillor Duff, followed by Councillor Stewart. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Convener. My question is on page 36 of our papers, which is 20 in the annual performance report. And there's a statistic there about 47 sustainable, good quality new jobs were created for rural residents. And I just wondered if we could get some more information about what type of jobs these were and where they were located. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I'm just wondering whether Alison Seggie can comment there.
Yes, me again. That was through our rural recruitment incentive, which was added to the budget a couple of years ago. I could provide more detail offline on the particular sectors, but it'll be across a wide variety of different sectors and in different geographies across the spread of the communities. I don't have the precise details to hand in terms of number of jobs in Blairgowrie versus Kinross, for example, but I can certainly provide a note following the meeting with a bit of an update and a bit of a better flavour of what types of jobs and where. But certainly it's been a very popular programme, and we do have some funding through some additional Scottish Government money to do a recruitment incentive in the city as well. So incentives are available in both the rural areas and in the city.
Thanks, Vice Convener. That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And Karen Donaldson has intimated to me that she can respond further to Councillor Barrett's question just now. Karen, if you'd like to come in.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillor Barrett, the response to your question is costs 1 and 2 are different views of our expenditure. So cost 1 looks at the subjective codes in terms of how our money is spent, whereas the second bar chart looks at the thematic expenditure across the particular service areas within the council. Unfortunately, what you have picked up is that the bar charts have lost the values
and I think that's something that's just unfortunately happened when it's gone through the design process. And I'll make sure that both a descriptor and the values are added to this version of the annual performance report before it goes forward to strategic policy and resources and before it's published finally. So thank you very much for picking that up, and I hope that will be clearer in the finalised version. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Karen. The next question is from Councillor Colin Stewart.
Thanks, Vice Convener. I think I've got two questions, one specific and one about the content and one general about annual performance measures. My specific question is, there's mention in the report of extending the range of learning subjects available to young people by establishing a virtual campus. And I just wondered what the actual increase in the number of subjects available was, and whether that was an overall increase or whether it was a net increase once we'd taken into account the sort of national fall in subject choice that's been widely reported on in foregoing months.
Thank you very much for that. Perhaps can I ask Sheena Devlin to address that, and we'll come back to your second question in due course, Colin.
Councillor Parrott, if I may defer the question to David McCluskey, Service Manager within Secondary. He will be able to answer Councillor Stewart's question. Thank you.
Definitely.
Thanks very much, Councillor Stewart. So this year, as part of our virtual campus, we are offering 5 new subjects between our virtual campus and in conjunction with colleagues as part of a regional improvement collaborative. All of these subjects are at advanced higher level. Some of them were offered individually in some of our bigger schools before, but they weren't really available to young people who attended smaller schools with smaller roles. So we've got that net increase, if you like, in availability in terms of virtual campus. And we're already planning to expand our virtual campus for next session to introduce more level 3 and more level 4 learning as well. And plans for that are well underway, using in the widening course choice money that we got as part of the budget motion money. And also the money that we've got in terms of virtual, the 0.2 FTE that's going out in schools to establish virtual learning regions. So as I say, we've got a solid foundation at the moment, I believe, in terms of these 5 advanced higher subjects, but plans in terms of what young people are actually able to engage with in school this year are growing beyond that, and the expanding in further sessions as well.
Okay, and on the point about whether this is a net increase overall, once you take into account the national decline in subject choice.
So the advanced higher subjects that we are offering this year as part of the virtual campus, they are an increase in some of our individual schools who were unable to offer them previously, whereas perhaps in some of our bigger schools they indeed kind of replicate part of the offer that was there. But over the piece for us, they're part of a net increase overall.
So just to be absolutely clear, 5 additional subjects at advanced higher is more than the number of subject offerings which have been dropped from school curriculums over the last year.
Yeah, what I can say is that in terms of our senior phase curriculum, excuse me, in Perth and Kinross, we have not had a narrowing of that school curriculum over the past year, and indeed working in conjunction with colleagues in Perth College and other learning partners, we'll be looking to expand that curriculum, and that's part of our ongoing senior phase curricular review. So I'd be able to say that confidently.
That's great, thank you. And my Vice Convener, my more general question was...
Yeah, please move on to that. There are no other questions from others. Thank you.
We've got an annual performance report here. Each section pulls out certain key achievements, but without necessarily, specifying what the whether those were part of whether those were part of a targeted approach or whether they were just things that happened to be achieved during the year. But when the annual performance report in each of the sections turns to actually the key performance indicators, and I think I've made this point before when we've been reviewing the report. We go to the PK performs. This is the flicking back and forward that I think Councillor Barrett was referring to, and those key performance indicators within the key performance PK performs dashboard are all related, as far as I can see, to national performance indicators. What I'm interested in is how elected members on Perth Kinross Council can set annual performance targets to be reported in the annual performance report that we consider to be critical, rather than national targets which may or may not be considered by elected members in Perth Kinross to be most relevant.
Councillor Stewart, I believe I can help with that. So apologies, I know Councillor Barrett and you have now both raised the PK performs, and in previous years we have included all of the detail within the report, and it was felt that that made the annual performance report too long and cumbersome. So we now do have links to the PK performs website, but we will certainly look at that as we move forward in future. In terms of your second question, I know that not all of the performance indicators that are on PK performs are national. Some of them are local to us, and these were developed as part of our corporate plan several years ago.
Okay. Okay, well, no, that's fine. If my misunderstanding then of reading that they were all national performance indicators, so that's helpful. And how do we achieve any improvement targets and performance against improvement targets set this year for next year, if you see what I mean?
So the local government bench framing targets that we've used, those are national ones. We can give you both, and the targets are set within the BMIPs, which I believe we will come to later today.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And the matter of content, I believe, for this report is always incredibly difficult. Inevitably, on any presentation, there will be some who think there's too much information contained, and equally there will be others who think there's too little. So it's incredibly difficult to get the balance right. Thank you. I see no further questions, and I think people have had ample opportunity to put in questions should they wish. So can I ask if the committee agrees that this paper has been scrutinised? And I will take silence as consent. Thank you very much. Therefore, we will now move on to paper 6. Paper 6 is the Education and Children's Services Joint Business Management and Improvement Plan for 21-22 and the Annual Performance Report for 2020-2021. And I would ask Sheena Devlin to introduce this paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Good morning, committee. Over the past year and more, which has been dominated by the global pandemic, we have continued to see tremendous effort and dedication from our staff across the service. We have also witnessed tremendous stoicism and resilience from our children, young people and their families. We have engaged with our children, young people and their families to hear and learn from their experiences over this difficult time, and have been and will continue to use that information and that learning to help improve our services, to help in turn improve outcomes for them. This BMIP exemplifies the wide, diverse range of services and business activity across all of education and children's services. It highlights several strengths and also highlights areas for improvement. There are a range of officers from across the service, from education, from services for children and young people and families, and from business and resources here today who will be able to answer questions. Thank you, Vice Convener.
Thank you very much for that, Sheena. Can I call for questions in the chat box? Councillor Liz Barrett, I see your question is first. Thank you.
Thank you. Looking at the risk register on page 23 of the report, Sheena, just wonder what can be done to reduce the probability that vulnerable young people, including those with additional support needs, have an increased risk of not having learning, social and emotional needs met. Because I see that and the management of change are our two kind of highest scoring risks. And I doubt if there's very much you can do to control the change aspects, but I wonder if we can reduce the probabilities on that risk.
Sorry, Councillor Barrett, can you just say which page you're on again?
Page 23.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. In our risk register, we have identified a range of measures that we think are effective in terms of doing just what you've said there. What we do recognise, however, is that in this ongoing pandemic, this cohort of young people are possibly at most risk, particularly if services that they would routinely, access, i.e. being in school, being in a specialist provision, that kind of thing is not able to happen in the usual way. And so what we have identified are a range of, if you like, workarounds for that. And some of the learning that I referred to in my introduction was exactly learning in relation to that. So what was it that hadn't worked as well as we might have expected during the first lockdown? And we looked to put in place different approaches during the second lockdown. So there is quite a bit of detail that sits behind that. And if you're all right with this, Vice Convener, I would ask Sharon Johnson, who would perhaps be able to illustrate just some of those in more detail, the general points that I've raised there, Councillor Barrett. Are you both okay with that?
Quite happy with that. Thank you, Sheena.
Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director. Thank you, Councillor Barrett. You're quite right. We have identified that those children who are most vulnerable as a result of COVID have been the most impacted, and partly that's because of those children with additional support needs who most need in-person teaching and learning experiences. It's very difficult for them to learn online. And so we did learn lessons from the first lockdown where we were not permitted to have large numbers of children together. We worked very hard to make sure that their well-being and their learning opportunities were done well remotely. But during the second lockdown, we asked all of our schools to identify those most vulnerable learners and to accommodate them as a matter of priority within our schools. And that made a huge difference actually in terms of the second lockdown. We're also aware that our most vulnerable children are those who are also living in poverty and have been the most disadvantaged. And we've put in place a huge number of measures, and in fact they probably take up the most of our improvement actions for this year in relation to improving inclusive practice. And that's about making sure that at universal level within all of our schools, we've got the right supports in place for those children who are vulnerable. Some examples of that are that we have employed 20 family support workers within our early years settings to support families and support them in their children's learning, because we know that they've been very much affected in terms of their ability to socialise. We've also included ECPs in Primary 1 classes this year, and we have reorganised and restructured some of our nurture support that was in some schools but not in all schools, and we've increased that universal level of support for those young people. And as Sheena said, we have got numbers of other measures, but I hope that gives you some confidence that we're well aware of the risks and that we are taking action to mitigate against the most prevalent. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sharon. Councillor Barrett, do you want to come back in quickly at all?
No, that's lovely. Thank you very much, Sharon, and thanks for all you're doing.
Thank you very much. I now have a question from our convener, which will be followed by Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener. Thank you for this report, Sheena and Sharon, indeed. The question I have is perhaps a fairly generic question that I know that because of various things to do with COVID, that this report is perhaps coming a little bit later to this committee than would be normal. But I'm really more concerned about the strategic priorities for 2021-22. As we're halfway through the year, while you've listed the strategic priorities, it's not clear which of those are actually being started, in progress, or which are still challenging. And I'm just wondering if there's some sort of overview you can provide us with on those.
Thank you, Councillor McCollum. You're absolutely right. The report is coming slightly later than wouldn't be normally the case. I'm thinking last year we brought this paper to, it was probably the June time, I think, Scrutiny Committee, and then it follows on, of course, after Scrutiny to lifelong learning. So of course it'll be going to lifelong learning even later in the day because it's coming later here. I'll ask James Childs if that's okay to come in and tell you about how we intend and indeed how we are monitoring progress against that and how that will be reported. Thank you.
Thanks, Sheena. James.
So if James is coming on, whilst he's coming to answer the question, I can explain that we have a performance calendar within Education and Children's Services which sets out clear timelines for a range of performance information to be made available to the service divisional management teams, that's then escalated to the senior management team within ECS, and then we provide these update performance reports as necessary in a range of other fora. For example, there's things that we routinely have to report to Scottish Government on and provide updates there. Similarly, other reports within the Council. So I'm not sure if James is available to give you a wee bit more information about that.
James, we're having very great difficulty hearing you. Perhaps you could try to reconnect and we can come back to your response in due course. But in the meantime, we will move on if unless Sheena, you want to pick up on any last points there.
No, thank you. I think if we're able to re-establish James' connection, Councillor McCall, if there's further detail over and above that, which I've already provided, James will be able to provide that.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. There seems to be a lot of connection issues today, Sheena, but perhaps it's something that can come back to the next Scrutiny Committee, you know, just as an update on where the performance report is going. I think it sort of follows on from Councillor Sarber's comments earlier about child poverty. But of course, very often people come out of child poverty, end up in adult poverty, particularly school leavers. So I think if something can be brought forward to the next Scrutiny meeting, I think that would be helpful to give us an update on the performance, on the priorities for 21-22. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take Councillor Wilson's question now, but if James can get back in before we move on from this paper, then certainly he can contribute. Councillor Wilson, your question.
Thanks, Vice Convener, and thanks for the report. I'm on page 107, which are the Education and Children's Services strategic risks. I noted that there's a couple of score nines there. I think we share the concern about that, but the questions related to resources under the current pressures that we're presently experiencing, of that it can be staff absence due to COVID, it can be staff absence due to stress, it can be organisational change, and we're still in that era. How are we placed as an organisation in ECS to cope with the ongoing challenges we've got in resources, especially in recruiting? And I understand there are delays in recruiting staff, recruiting new teachers and new staff.
Councillor Wilson, I'll ask Sharon Johnson to provide you with some information there, but what I would say is that this is a live issue for us, as you'll appreciate, quite literally on a weekly basis across our senior management team, where we do regularly discuss where we may be experiencing any resource pressure, whether that's physical or in terms of people, and each head of service is very vigilant and alert to that, and ensures that, you know, any moving around of staff is appropriate as priorities rise and fall and change and become more acute as they do from time to time. And then when that can no longer be managed within a particular service, that's when we look at that as a wider service, and indeed when we look at that across the council to understand where there might need to be a realignment of resource council-wide rather than just within a specific service. And I would say, just to conclude, that that is something that we have become ever more adept at, and is actually much more of our new business as usual activity because of the demands and the ebbs and flows of the ongoing pandemic, which we recognise will be with us for some time to come. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Sheena. Councillor Wilson, do you wish to come back in quickly at all?
I'm happy to answer the further detail if required, Vice Convener.
Yeah, please go on.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, in relation to your question about resources, we were very fortunate in that prior to the additional funding that was provided by the Scottish Government, we did receive some budget motion monies, which was anticipating that there might be some additional needs within our schools, and we did manage to recruit an additional 11.5 FTE for our secondary schools, and that was able to happen from March. And that was really very helpful. We've since then had additional money from the Scottish Government to introduce extra teaching staff and extra support staff. And we reported at Lifelong Learning Committee our plan for that. What I would say is that we have not actually suffered recruitment issues in relation to teachers. We managed very successfully to recruit to all of the teaching posts that we had available, and we now have, in addition to our normal complement, 30 plus additional teachers within the system. We've also managed to recruit additional support staff and in fact a new role such as community learning assistants, which will help with our attendance issues and working with families, and additional pupil support assistants and early years practitioners. There are some recruitment issues still outstanding within that group of staff, but we are continuing to work on that. As the Executive Director said, our major issues are around dealing with the impact of COVID and positive cases within schools. So where we have staff in schools and they're identified as a close contact, or indeed they have a positive result, that is impacting on the short-term supply shortages in our schools and nurseries. We have anticipated that, and we have a plan in place that we've worked on with our school leaders and our HR colleagues, where if there is a particular school that has an issue with staffing for a short period of time, we've got a system in place that will support the teaching capacity within that school and indeed the support assistant capacity. We've also got a contingency plan, if needed, that our additional COVID recovery staffing will be moved to then make sure that we do not have children who are not without teachers or support staff. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Vice Convener, thank you to both senior officers for their thorough and helpful answers.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson, for that. I'll now take Councillor Stewart, followed by Councillor Sarwar, and as I have just recorded in the chat, Councillor Sarwar's question will be the last. Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Vice Convener. It's a question in two parts. There's a specific example which I'll use to maybe illustrate a general question. For example, on page, one thing that I am interested in is about the Perth Kinross action plan to deliver a Tayside mental wellbeing strategy and the launch of the Perth Kinross local mental health pathway, and I wondered where we are with those actions.
Councillor Stewart, we are in the middle of putting together a presentation for all elected members on exactly where we are with that, And I think there's actually a date for that in the diary that we have provided Linda Simpson and Democratic Services with, so we'll be able to give you a full update in relation to all of that work in its connectivity across different council services, different partners within Perth and Kinross, and then wider across Tayside as well.
Okay, this is obviously a priority for 21-22, and the priority there is to develop and implement an action plan to deliver the new strategy. But this is us in September of 21-22, so 5 months in. As you highlighted, Executive Director, this paper isn't going to go to lifelong learning until November for approval, or housing and communities until committee until even later in November. So how can we present these as priorities for 21-22 when elected members are not giving the strategic direction on this and being asked to, we're only being asked to scrutinise it today, but the elected members on the relevant committees are not going to be asked to approve these as the strategic priorities until 8 months into the year to which they apply?
Councillor Stewart, I can say that in terms of mental health and wellbeing and the approach to that, that has been a priority for Education and Children's Services for the last, well, very many years. One of our 4 key priorities, one of our 5 key priorities in relation to the 5 big priorities, it's Best Start, learning and attainment, health and wellbeing, care and equity, and safe and protected. Those have all been agreed for some time, and what you're reading in here is how we are continuing to take that forward in response, as I said in my introduction, to what we know as a changing landscape. COVID has impacted significantly on everybody and has, you know, necessitated in a number of cases a different look, a different emphasis at some of those priorities, but those priorities have already been agreed, and this is the operationalisation of those priorities that we are taking forward. So I'm not seeing that there's any incongruity between those areas that are identified in here as priorities and those which have previously been agreed.
Thank you for that.
So sorry, I understand that there's not an incongruity there, but these are actions to achieve the strategic objectives that have been set previously, but specifically the recommendation will be for these to be approved, for the BMIP to be approved by elected members at Housing and Community and Lifelong Learning. So how can these be the priorities for 21-22 when it comes, you know, more than halfway through the relevant year?
Councillor Stewart, I think, if I may, you make a reasonable point, but as Sheena Devlin has said, this is an ongoing priority. Matters have been considerably affected by the COVID that we've experienced. It would be desirable in normal times if this perhaps had been brought earlier to committee and scrutiny, and I accept that, but I'm not sure myself that there's a huge amount more that we can draw out from this just now, and unless you really want to come back on this, I'd prefer to move on. Thank you.
I'll maybe have a comment on it then.
No, sorry, Vice Convener, I can come in here. I've already asked Mrs Devlin if she will come back to the next committee meeting with an update on the progress report, and she's agreed to do that or give us some update, and perhaps Councillor Stewart, that might answer some of your concerns, but I would agree that, you know, we need to move on.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sarwar.
Thank you, Deputy Convener. Yeah, just to move things on a little bit, I think it's always good to have a good news story, and I was just wondering if we could hear a little bit more about the rollout and the impact of the 1140 hours entitlement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sheena.
I'm very happy to ask Sharon or Ben to provide that for you, Councillor Sarwar. And Vice Convener, if I may, in relation to the last point, I know we're moving on, I think it would be helpful to have a discussion about the timing of reports, because we are in fact all of us, yourselves and us, at the mercy of you know, much bigger influences in things that are impacting on timescales. And so in terms of that corporate performance calendar and reporting, it has been unduly affected, absolutely, by COVID. However, we do routinely bring 6 monthly reports back to committee, and of course we're very happy to do that. But we do know that things are out of kilter, and what we're trying to do is just try and get that back on track as swiftly and as efficiently as we possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Councillor Sarwar, in answer to your question about the rollout of 1140 hours, we have obviously had some real challenges in making sure that we delivered that on time. It was due to be implemented fully by August 2021, and in fact we were able to fully deliver in February of this year. And despite the challenges around doing things like virtual recruitment and talking to our families, we have managed very successfully to make sure that we've got a full rollout of a range of different ways in which parents can access 1140 hours. We are really, I think, very excited about this year's plan, because while we've had the buildings, and most of the buildings are now complete, we've made some real improvements to the environments of our nurseries. We've recruited a whole new range of staff with different staff roles, and we've got some innovative projects that we're really excited about now developing in terms of VLC communities and different types of workers who will work better with families. So I'd like to ask Ben Scott just to give some detail of that.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and thank you, Sharon. Yes, 1140 really has been a good news story, and we have at least just around about 3,000 children currently experiencing that full offer through our local authority, our funded providers, including childminders. And as Sharon said, we really have completed the kind of nuts and bolts element of 1140, and now we're ready to move on to finesse the experience that we want for our children and our families. And so we are looking to further develop outdoor learning to ensure that all of our children, but particularly our most vulnerable children, have that experience on a daily basis. And importantly, we want to move on to focus on the whole family. And I think in a previous paper it was mentioned that we have 20 family practitioners who are now, I'm pleased to report, out and about in communities, building up relationships with the children and their families to be able to give that all-round support that a family really needs to ensure that their child can develop and prosper in the right conditions in the home as well as at nursery.
Thank you for that. Councillor Sarwar, do you want to come back in briefly before we conclude?
No, thank you, Deputy Convener.
Thank you very much. In that case, can we regard paper 6 as being properly scrutinised, and I will take silence as consent to that. Thank you. In that case, I will now return the meeting to the convener. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener, very ably handled. I am going to actually have a short 10-minute recess stroke comfort break. I have had some messages privately asking can we have one, so given that we have quite a tight time constraint today, if we can have everybody back here by 11:45, 11:45, and we'll suspend the meeting until then. Thank you.
Hello, Audrey.
Welcome back, everyone. I think now that our short recess has ended, I hope everyone's back in the meeting, and I would like to recommence the meeting. If IT can update the screen for people watching online, that would be helpful. Thank you. So now we move on to paper 7, which is the annual performance report 2021, which is to March of this year, and the business management improvement plan for 21-22 for communities. And could I ask Fraser Crofts to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, convener, and good morning, councillors. So this is the first report for the new community service and recognises changes to business areas within the service. That is the transfer of property services to corporate and democratic services and the inclusion of culture and communities and innovation into the community service. In responding to the pandemic, our primary focus was on supporting communities and vulnerable people. We reviewed and redesigned all services and areas of work at pace to accommodate all COVID-related measures into our day-to-day practice. Many staff were retrained and retasked to deliver essential services. The process of service adjustment, revising processes, risk assessment, staff briefings and enhanced quality assurance was and remains continuous. Essential services such as waste collection, homelessness and emergency housing repairs continued, whilst ensuring people in our communities were safe, secure and well supported. Despite the pandemic, however, we have continued to record notable success in some of our key business areas. For example, housing completions were the highest recorded since 2008. We maintained a full curbside waste and recycling service to all domestic and commercial customers throughout the pandemic, circa 100,000 uplifts during the year, and developed the Economic Wellbeing Plan, which was approved by Council earlier in the year. The impact of the pandemic in our communities is really only just starting to become clearer as we continue to support our citizens and businesses through the response phase into recovery. As we look forward, our pandemic experiences have made us all think about what kind of Perth and Kinross we would like to live in and what kind of service and council we can be. We will use the ethos of the Perth and Kinross offer to work closely with local communities to design and deliver high quality services that people want and need. Thanks, convener, and myself and colleagues from the community service will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. If anyone has a question to ask, can they please put a Q in the chat box as normal? Oh, there we go. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, convener. I have the same issue with this that we've raised on previous reports today, that we're halfway through the year and the term of this plan. But looking at page 139 of the papers, which is 17 of the report, the focus for 21 to 22 includes progressing road safety projects. In March, you'll be aware that the council increased the budget for roads infrastructure and included another 200,000 for additional 20-mile-an-hour signs around our schools. I know 3 of us here are quite frustrated that in our own ward it's very disappointing that implementation of the school exclusion zone around Viewlands Primary and Fairview and Perth Academy has continued to slip. And I understand this is partly due to pressure on resources within the council and lack of recruitment using these funds that were allocated. I want to ask what we're doing to ensure that we are tackling road safety around our schools, please.
Yeah, thank you for the question. My colleague Mark Butterworth. Mark, are you in the call?
Yeah, thanks, Fraser, and thanks, Councillor Barrett, for the question. Well, road safety is a priority, as you know. It's certainly a priority for members and it's a priority for the Traffic and Network team. In terms of the specific school exclusion zone that you refer to, I haven't got the details. You know, we do so many schemes each year. You know, we've got a database in terms of requests for almost 800 road safety schemes. So we've got a lot on, and I do appreciate and recognise the additional resources members have given us. We are really struggling. I think it's probably a theme that you're going to hear today in the meeting. I know Sheena mentioned that we've got we're struggling in terms of recruitment, we're struggling in terms of resources generally, and I think also the nature of the funding sometimes doesn't help us, because when we get one-off allocations, and I think this year we got included in the one-off allocation was for additional resources. It's very difficult for us to recruit and get those additional resources in the year and spend the money. But I can say they are an absolute priority. I don't know if Brian Cargill's on the call. I don't know if he's got more details about the particular scheme, but that you mentioned in terms of where that's up to. But I can only reassure you that the road safety initiatives are our priority. I think we've delivered. I think it's something like 8. I think we might have delivered already this year. But as I said, I don't know the details around that particular one. But recruitment and resources is a real issue for us, and it is the rest of the council, as other colleagues have said.
If I may just come in here, as you probably know, I've been the councillor leading on this project for the past 3 years with the parent councils, and I do appreciate that there are some constraints, not least of which are impacted by this. By the current circumstances that we're living in. However, I would ask all elected members not to talk about to raise issues specifically ward related. And I know you use that as an example, Councillor Barrett, but it's just a reminder to particularly some of our newer members to the council as a whole, and also to this committee, that our job is to scrutinise, generally, and not to try and focus too much on specifics. But thank you for your question. It's very
it was a general point I was trying to raise.
No, I understand that, Liz. I did say that. I said you're using it as an illustrative example. So I wasn't trying to imply that you shouldn't raise it as an illustrative example. It was as much for the officers to perhaps talk about more general responses, which I'm not quite sure that's what you received, other than the issue around resources and recruitment. So if everybody can just bear in mind, officers and elected members, that we need to look at the wider situation across the whole of the council, not just on specific issues, unless they are symptomatic of something that's happening everywhere else. So thank you, Liz. I think Councillor Wilson, you're next, I think.
Thank you, convener. I've slightly rephrased my question now. But you'll be familiar with some of this, convener. Part of the challenge that we've had is dealing with flooding throughout Perth and Kinross, and that these are recurring events because of a whole set of circumstances. But one of the problems we've had is that the normal street sweeping resources have been diverted to help with refuse collection, which is perfectly reasonable. But we're now getting the situation where, in terms of gully blockages, and Mr. Butterworth will know what's coming now, I think, convener, the related activities of making sure that litter clearance takes place, that street sweeping takes place, in order to prevent extra muck, for want of a better word, getting into the road gullies and blocking them potentially for flooding. And we're about to meet the autumn leaf fall, convener. I wonder what plans Mr Butterworth has got to ensure that we have a plan for dealing with that, and also to divert resources wherever possible and appropriate. I do commend the work that the Environment Service have done, convener. This is not a criticism of the management or the men. It's simply, are we getting geared up to being able to help prevent flooding events throughout Perth and Kinross in the autumn?
Who's going to take that question?
Yeah, I can take that, Councillor McCall. Yeah, thanks, Councillor Wilson.
Mark.
I think, you know, what we've seen over the last 18 months is the redeployment of staff to essential services, and one of the services that we fell foul to that was our street sweeping. So we have been doing less of that. So I accept that that has created some level of problem for members in terms of the responses or the feedback you get from your constituents. In terms of the impact on flooding, I think it's one of these myths that we get that block gullies are leading. There's lots of block gullies that are leading to flooding. I think last year we received 800. I think we responded to 800 complaints from residents that they felt that the gullies were blocked with dirt and had not been swept or cleaned. And when we went out to them, more than 600 were actually running well. So what we're looking to do is to put out some comms messages around the gullies and our cleaning regimes and the impact. But gullies is absolutely something that we get every time, you know, there is a flood event. Residents will say that's because the council hasn't been out to unblock that gully, and the majority of the time it's actually not the case. So hopefully as restrictions die down, we can divert more resources back to street sweeping. But I'd like to reassure you that block gullies is not generally a reason or a cause of flooding. And as I said, we're going to get some comms messages out to residents, so you know the situation is clear on that.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Wilson, does that answer your question?
I'm not totally convinced by that response. I don't want to have a debate in the middle of the Scrutiny Committee meeting.
Well, you're perfectly entitled to a follow-up question, Councillor Wilson, so feel free.
I think there are instances, and convener, you'll pardon me giving instances from the ward we all represent in Perth South, where block gullies have been a material addition to adding to local flood events, and I won't start to narrate them now because you're familiar with quite a lot of them, convener, but I'm not satisfied with the answer that block gullies don't cause flooding. In some instances they've contributed to localised flooding, and what I was really asking is, have we got a plan for once COVID eases and we can get back to the normal refuse collection arrangements, which I understand we're working towards, when we might expect to get extra street clearing done, so that we could avoid some of these problems. That was really my question.
Mark?
Just in response to that, Councillor Wilson, I know, sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. I'm not saying that block gullies haven't in the past contributed to flooding. I suppose what I'm saying is a lot of the time people appear to blame or identify that as a reason, and a lot of the time that is absolutely not the case. In terms of time and of additional resources, one of the major pressures that we're currently facing is within refuse collection and the requirement to have a support vehicle running behind the refuse collection vehicles, which has taken up around 20 to 25 additional staff. We are hopeful, but I can't say with certainty, we're hopeful to move back to the normal 3 in a cab arrangements at the beginning of October. That will free up a number of our operatives, and hopefully then we can move those resources back. In terms of I'm just trying to find some of our stats in terms of the number of gullies that we actually clean each year, but we try to get out to most gullies every other year, and we've been keeping up with that performance. So we are getting out doing the general cleaning of the gullies and keeping them running smoothly. And when we do receive complaints, we do get out there. I was just trying to make the point that a lot of the time people think the gullies are blocked and are generating flooding, and that's not the case.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Willie, does that answer your question?
I've got my answer to my question about when we might get more resources back at the street sweeping. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, thank you very
much. We'll leave the gully debate for another time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Massey?
Thank you, convener, and thank you to Mr. Cross for such a detailed and comprehensive report. If I may, convener, I have 3 questions which are all related, and I'll ask them all at the same time.
That's fine, go ahead.
My questions are on page 7 of Appendix 1, or page 129 of our pack. It says in the report we developed a COVID memorial website, Lost Found, and are developing a physical memorial for unveiling in September 2021. I'm pleased that the digital and physical memorial is planned and wanted to learn more, but when I click the link to the Lost Found website, it shows a message saying that the page cannot be found. So my questions are, can we have some detail of the website content? And also, can you give us some insight of what the physical memorial may be? And finally, what is the budget for this project?
Thank you, Councillor Massey. Who wants to answer that question? Fraser, would you be able to address that?
I think that one's for me, convener.
Oh, Fiona, okay.
Thank you, Fiona.
Thanks for the questions, Councillor Massey. I've just clicked on the link as well and had the same problem, so apologies for that. The site has been live and working well since it was put up, coming up to a year ago, actually. So we'll get that fixed and recirculated to committee members ASAP. The project, Councillor Massey, we kicked off, as I said, about 12 months ago, and it is a project which brings together local artists of different disciplines, so writers, musicians, painters, etc., with people who came forward at our invitation and with appropriate support, and I would want to emphasise that, who had, as the title of the project suggests, lost something as a result of COVID. Now, typically that was people who had been bereaved, they lost a loved one. There were other kinds of losses as well, which the project explored. So over the course of this year, the website's been putting up the stories of those members of our community who lost a loved one or something else very important in their life during COVID, and matching them with artists who've worked with them to produce a piece of work to commemorate that loss. You asked about what the physical memorial will look like. That has been delayed. 12 months ago, I think we all hoped that COVID would be behind us a bit sooner than it's actually turned out to be. What the memorial will look like is something we will consult with communities and people who've participated in the project about. So we don't have a firm proposal for that yet. But we expect that we will bring that forward for councillors and communities to consider sometime in the next 6 months.
Thank you. Does that
question, Councillor Massey?
The only thing, what is the budget for this? Is there a set budget?
Yes, it was a small budget. I will double check. I think from memory it was £23,000, and that includes artists' fees, installation costs, engagement with the project participants, making sure that appropriate support and follow-up was in place for some participants. But I'll double check that and get back to you.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Fiona and Councillor Massey. Councillor Parrott, you have a question, please.
Yes, thank you, convener. I'm on page 144 of our pack and page 22 of the report. I note that during the pandemic, £82 million has been distributed to businesses in Perth and Kinross affected by COVID-19. My question is that process of business support in terms of the distribution of funds now complete, or do we still have staff dedicated to that function? Thank you.
I think if Alison Seggy's on the call, perhaps you can help with the response.
We did have significant numbers of staff dedicated to that over the last year. I'm not particularly close to it, but I believe that most of those staff have been stood down and returned to normal duties. However, there is still some funding available, and I think we're looking at how that will be spent going forward. I think businesses still have to justify that they've had a specific COVID impact. So I think we're working on how that money that is still left in the pot for business grants will be developed over the next few months in terms of how businesses will access that and what the staff resource might be. But I think the majority of staff, if not all, have now returned to more normal duties.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Parrott?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So I have a question I'm going to ask, but if anybody has any comments they want to make in this paper, please indicate in the chat bar just now. So my question is really around perhaps what's not in the report, that I think should be on page 153 of our pack and page 31 of the report. There is a performance measure in terms of adaptations on medical grounds for or medical adaptations in housing. However, we have a significant number, I believe, of residents awaiting transfer to properties because of medical reasons, and there aren't sufficient properties to go around. Some of these residents are almost housebound as a consequence, and are particularly during this pandemic period are suffering a great deal of mental not well-being, the total opposite of well-being. So I'm just wondering where in your priorities for 21-22 is there any reference to improving the accessibility and the availability of housing for those people who are on the maximum points for medical priority for a transfer as opposed to a medical adaptation? I'm not sure who wants to answer that. Fraser, would you to start that off?
Thanks, Convener. I'm not sure if Elaine Ritchie is on the call. Unfortunately, Claire, as we know, is not here today, so it's not an area of expertise of mine. So Elaine, are you on the call?
Yes, Fraser, I am. That's a really good question. Thank you for that. It's not covered within our BMIT, but it's closely covered within our performance management framework, which is it's an operational service framework. And it is an issue that we're closely monitoring in terms of people that don't meet the threshold for homelessness assistance, but do have significant medical needs that they've got strategic priority. So we've built that into our allocation policy to try and speed up the length of time that they wait for rehousing. The difficulty is finding suitable housing in terms of ground floor. We have fewer ground floor properties, but we are building more in terms of that. So it's a combination of not just our waiting list, but it's the properties available to meet those needs, and it's taken a holistic view of those individuals as well. So we're looking at monitoring those cases much closer, whereas before we used to do 3 monthly monitorings of the cases, and we've now brought that forward to monthly monitoring so we can keep on up to date in terms of what housing options are available for those individuals, and also working quite closely with our colleagues in health and social care. So yes, it is an area of importance to us and a priority. Although it's not covered in our BMIT, it's definitely covered in our local housing strategy and our housing contribution statement.
Thank you very much, Elaine. I know that this is an increasing issue, though, and it's not just the ground floor properties, but also the size of the properties. But in many cases, there are wider family members who are also impacted by this as well. So I would respectfully suggest that it should be included in your BMIT. It should be a specific item in your performance report. You know, if you can have a measure, an indicator on medical adaptations, there should be an indicator for medical relocations and for new applicants as well. So I would appreciate that, and perhaps something that can be brought forward at least to the housing communities. I would recommend it's come forward to the Housing Communities Committee in due course. Thank you. So I see Colin Stewart, you have a question raised, but before that, Ms. Mark Butterworth, you have a response now to Councillor Wilson. I see you put it in the chat.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Cole. Yeah, I was just looking at our performance indicators in terms of the gullies, and I've just put in the chat that more than 95% of the gullies across Perth and Kinross are flowing freely at the moment, according to our records. And in terms of complaints, we're getting out to more than 90% of the complaints that we're getting out, and we're clearing them as well. So our records are quite up to date in terms of the gullies and the work that we're doing to keep them flowing freely.
Thank you, Mark. Is that helpful, Councillor Wilson?
Yes, convener. You and I have some specialist road gullies, but we'll discuss.
That's not for here.
Not for no.
Okay.
Just saying
Thank
we must have some of the 4%. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on then. Councillor Stewart, you have a question, please.
Thank you, convener. So I would just make a note that there do seem to be some performance indicators which aren't reflected in the appendix containing the key performance indicators. For example, on page 16 of our packs, 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth bullet point from the bottom says 93% of all faults on the traffic network were rectified within the target time, and that's a significant improvement on the previous year's performance by 11%. So there's clearly a target there, but there doesn't seem to be a key performance indicator in the appendix attached. There's probably other ones which may count as statutory indicators. Now, the one above that is about air quality. There will be statutory indicators to do with that.
What is your question, Councillor Stewart?
So my question is, in terms of our focus for 21-22 and all of the things that we want to achieve, how without actually doing a side-by-side comparison next year of the annual performance report with this year's plans, how do we achieve that? How do we make sure that there's a performance report versus a performance result versus the target that we're setting out as a focus for 21-22?
Okay, thank you. Fraser, can you take that question, please?
Yes, thank you for the question. So we have obviously a number of priorities you'll see within the BMIP that we are set to achieve in the coming financial year, and indeed not just 21-22 but beyond. Some of those will have specific or be attached to specific key performance indicators, and as such are set out in the appendices, and indeed have targets as we go forward. My understanding is also that we have a number of other targets which are not necessarily KPIs, but they are targets within the service which we will monitor internally and look to achieve therefrom also. So we, for the new targets that we have, or the new priorities rather that we have for the service, we will seek to incorporate feedback in terms of performance through our divisional management teams and SMT to track progress, and those that require reporting up through the more formal process, I suppose we'd come through what would normally be the 6 monthly BMIP update, and then also next year's annual performance report. So there's a little bit of a mix, I think, here in terms of priorities and targets that will be managed and monitored more specifically within the service, and those that are attached to KPIs. I don't know if that answers the question.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Stewart?
I think I would like to see a sort of model or paradigm which just was a bit clearer about if this is agreed by E&I and Housing and Communities as the priorities for this year, that they're followed up in next year's if they're not associated with KPIs. I think that would be, if there was a very specific paradigm for the methodology, I think is the word I'm looking for the way to do that.
I would actually quite agree with you, Councillor Stewart, particularly coming to Scrutiny Committee. I think it's really important that we see all of the ancillary information as well, so that we can properly scrutinise what's going on. And it goes to my point as well about having specific performance measures. So I think your point is well made, and I thank you for that. And perhaps, Fraser, you can take that back into the communities team and discuss how we can address those points.
Yeah, happy to do so, Convener, and I think clearly that's something that we cross-cut as well across other services. So
absolutely, yeah.
Across other services also. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. So if there are no other, I don't see any other comments or questions. Hey, so
Convener.
Yes.
It's Anne Jarvis. Sorry,
Anne.
I have neither chat nor hand function working
today.
Dear
me. That's a very unfortunate position to be in, but I'm glad to hear from you.
Well, I'm here. Just about all the road safety measures and the huge amount that there is in the pipeline. I mean, I've added 3 requests this week and it's only Wednesday. I think some feedback and discussion with the local members would be beneficial. I don't know if Mr. Butterworth would like to comment on that, because otherwise we're just going to keep adding and adding and adding to his workload.
Mark?
Yeah, like thank you, Councillor. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Councillor. We actually, before COVID, we did have a series of meetings with ward members to explain the database and to also explain the prioritisation system, and also to give members an opportunity to see where their schemes or the schemes within their wards sat in the prioritisation and when potentially they would be considered. Now we are looking to do that again. Now we're coming the other side of COVID, so there will be a series of ward meetings with elected members to explain the database, to explain the process, to explain the prioritisation model, and to just have to start that dialogue again. So we'll absolutely be doing that over the next probably 2 to 3 months.
Well, that's good news. Thank you.
Yeah, I think all ward councillors will be happy to get that information. Thank you. Yes, I see a big thumbs up from Liz. I'm sure she's not alone. Thank you, Anne. And nice to hear from you. Okay, so now we'll, if we've all the questions and comments on that paper, then can we note that paper? And as before, I will take silence as agreement. Okay, thank you. So now we move on to paper 8, which is the Corporate and Democratic Services Business Management and Improvement Plan for 2021-22. And can I ask Karen Donaldson to introduce this report, please?
Thank you, Councillor McCall. So I'm very pleased to present the Corporate and Democratic Services Business Management and Improvement Plan to Scrutiny Committee today. Corporate and Democratic Services connects and collaborates with all council services, our partners and communities, and therefore we support and enable delivery of services, improvement and transformation across the board. Our work in responding to the pandemic exemplified just how integral corporate service functions are to the provision of essential services which support our communities. And almost everything that you have heard in the annual performance report, including the COVID response and the other service BMIPs, have involved collaboration and input from corporate and democratic services, whether this be from a finance, people, property, legal, welfare benefits or customer contact services perspective. The Corporate and Democratic Services BMIP sets out how the service will contribute as strategic enablers of change and transformation, supporting democratic processes and managing the governance framework. And it also describes a range of specialist customer services. Our BMIP describes who we are, what we do and how we make a difference, and it reflects the changes in January 2021 which saw property services move to corporate and democratic services and planning and development management move into communities. This is the first business management and improvement plan which I present to the Scrutiny Committee as Chief Operating Officer, and I intend to use our BMIP as a meaningful tool to improve performance and engage staff and customers in how the service develops in years to come.
And I've also taken steps to realign resources to ensure that there is appropriate support in place to do that. Our Business Management Improvement Plan sets out our key challenges which influence our strategic direction, which are predominantly around key legislation, government policy, the financial outlook, the importance of digital and net zero targets. And of course, continuing our response to COVID and supporting and enabling recovery will see us continue to provide community support. The BMIP sets out our 6 priority themes along with the expected impacts and outcomes. I'm joined by a range of colleagues across the service today, and we are happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Karen, for that introduction. The first question is from Councillor Parrott. Councillor Andrew.
Thank you very much, convener. I'm on page 178 of our pack. I note with pleasure that £5.5 million of income was generated in 2021 as a result of welfare rights team interventions in getting people money they're entitled to under present regulations. I'm conscious that this is not a statutory service, but I'd be interested to know, if you like, how much the welfare rights team costs to run, because in my view, if they're raising that sort of money each year, then the cost benefit analysis is very, very positive for our community. Thank you.
Karen, do you want to take that question?
Thank you, Councillor Parrott and Councillor McCall. I don't have a breakdown of specifically the cost of running the Welfare Rights Service to hand at the moment. I'm wondering whether other colleagues on the call have that level of information. Otherwise, I can ensure that you get that. That's a question of detail that I don't have here today. I know that Alan Taylor and Lynn Brady are on the call, but it's perhaps something that we can come back to you on.
Karen, Lynn Brady, just a quick comment. I don't have that level of detail to hand, but I will get that to you so we can get that circulated.
So we have a comment from Scott Walker, so we can circulate that information.
Yes, if when that's available, we'll let you know, convener, and I'll verbally update committee if it's during committee. Otherwise, we'll ensure that it's circulated and made available and can be added to the minutes so that that's publicly available too.
Thank you. I mean, that's exactly what should happen at committee. At this committee in particular, any question raised that can't be answered should be answered to all committee members and included in the minute, so that there's a record of it. So thank you for that, Karen. Andrew, are you happy to wait for?
No, quite happy, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson, Willie, you have a question?
Thanks, convener. And I'm on the digital theme, and I'm on pages 181 and 186. It's to do with the local full fibre network and our interrelationship with that. That was SSE led in a private initiative, but I understand, convener, it's now available in the city centre or in the city. Mm-hmm. When will we be able to see some early wins in regard to that being of benefit to the council and council services, and a particular example such as upgrade in our CCTV system in the city?
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Karen, do you want to answer that, or one of your team?
I'm going to ask Alan Taylor, who chairs the Local Full Fibre Network Board, to answer that question. Thank you.
Alan?
Yes, hello councillors. Councillor Wilson, as you'll be aware, Local Full Fibre Network splits into 2 particular projects. The part that is complete is called PSAT, PSAT, and it covers 33 sites, as you said, predominantly in the city centre. We are still tidying up snagging works during September, but it is to all intensive purposes complete. However, like all of these projects, there is work that is required to be undertaken to make the circuits live, and that would probably take another 3 to 6 months. But because that's a fibre network, it obviously requires internet service providers to use it to offer services to constituents if that's what you're driving at in terms of your question. But without a doubt, it's an excellent project and service provision to make available for residents of Perth and businesses, obviously. The second part of local full fibre network is the PSBU element, and that's a contract with BT, as Alison Seggie indicated earlier on under the APR paper, and that is due to be complete and all sites addressed by the end of September if BT deliver on that, BT Openreach deliver on that contract. And again, the circuits then require to be made live and worked on by IT colleagues, and obviously because that's far more sites, 103 in rural areas, that will take possibly up to 12 months to have them all connected and in use. However, the main purpose of the project clearly is the DCMS kind of criteria about the number of businesses and premises that are in the locality of what we've done under that project, because premises that are passed within 50 metres and premises that are addressable within 300 metres are the premises that can then benefit from that network. So we are at the end of what is the local full fibre network project. However, the benefits of that do take time to accrue.
Thank you. Willie, does that answer your question?
Thank you for that update. I look forward to further report from Mr. Taylor. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart, we have a question from you, please.
Thank you, convener. So it's in relation to the, I think the impact on, this BMIP does seem to be presented slightly differently, so we don't have key performance indicators in the same way. So I'm therefore looking at the impact section on pages 20 and 21, and I'm wondering where we're establishing a baseline for some of these things. So the very first one is getting the basics right. How will we know we're making a difference? Positive staff feedback, positive customer feedback and outcomes. I presume in actual fact that we mean improved staff feedback and improved customer feedback and outcomes, because we would want it to be on an increasing positive trend rather than just positive as opposed to negative. But where do we establish the an accepting chief operating officer, that you said that this was the first BMIP you were presenting, but where do we establish the baselines to know whether we are improving year on year versus the preceding year?
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Karen, would you like to answer that question, or someone in your team?
I'm happy to answer that question. Thank you. I think that is indeed one of the first tasks that I wish to pay attention to, which is actually establishing the baseline so that we can have appropriate measures of improvement. We are a diverse service, and there are some measures in place, but I want to look at that more holistically across all service areas, so that we can capture customer feedback in particular, and look at more systematic ways of setting improvement targets in future. One of the noticeable challenges for corporate and democratic services is having meaningful performance indicators rather than just numerical targets. And I'm really keen to look at how we measure impact and improvement in outcomes rather than just things that we can count.
Councillor Stewart, does that answer your question?
Okay, thanks. I mean, I think there should be somewhere it would be easy to work out how to measure. So top of the next page, we've got building assets well maintained, fit for purpose and energy efficient. That should be, you know, there will be sort of statutory or well publicised guidance in establishing some of these, but I recognise obviously that some of the other bullet points on those 2 pages will be much more difficult to establish. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, and thank you, Karen, for that. I have no further questions, so if there...
Maybe my chat isn't working. I tried to write in a question before, Councillor
No,
Stewart.
I can't see your question, Councillor Sarwar. Fiona, would you like to go ahead?
Must have disappeared. Sorry. Thank you, convener. So just going back to the digital, which for those using the digital papers is page 15. Digital participation. It'd be great to hear more about the digital participation group, which says it's been in place since October 2020. I'm thinking about the great presentation that we had from Culture PK this morning, and I really like this idea of the hublet and just the different ways that they can hopefully move forward post-COVID and supporting communities. And I just wondered if there'd been a link up, or if you can just tell us more about how that participation group is going.
Thank you, Councillor Sarwar. Fiona or Karen, would you like to take that answer?
Yeah,
or for Alan?
Again, Alan Taylor is best placed to answer that. Alan is the chair of our digital participation working group.
Alan, over to you.
Yep, okay, thanks for the question, Councillor Sarwar. The Digital Participation Working Group, as you said, has been in place for a wee while now. We do have representation from Culture P&K. Sorry, I missed the earlier presentation, so if I don't link things up, then feel free to come back to me. We were tasked with putting together an action plan, obviously in terms of improving digital participation across the council area, with the focus on the three areas it mentions: technology, connectivity and capacity. We did do a presentation at the LOIP conference earlier in the year. The view generally is that capacity is the area to focus on. The technology and the connectivity can be resolved in terms of provision of devices, and you can see in the papers today that a number of devices have been made available to the most vulnerable via Connecting Scotland, and obviously we've touched on connectivity in terms of the local full fibre network. The type of actions that we have in the action plan, which is still a work in progress, are things like helping individuals to make the most use of their data. So we produced a data guide that was emailed out to all managers across the council back in June of this year, and I think it should be published on the website now. Because we have LEAD and PCABs and others, external groups working with us on the steering group, then they all have access to that as well, and they have all shared that through their networks, and their staff have access to it. We also put in a bid with Perth College to SCVO for £15,000. Perth College have what's called the WE Centre, which is involved in recycling devices. So we have looked at whether we can enhance that, given that it already exists, so that PKC residents can provide or donate unwanted devices to the college. The college can then refurbish them, and those can be made available to those most in need on an ongoing basis as we move forward. And in terms of what's happening just now, we are doing work in terms of the SCVO Digital Motivator and Champion training, which is basic training for frontline staff so they can support individuals in terms of very simple tasks in terms of being comfortable with their devices, how they make sure passwords are secure, how they can get in and do things in terms of internet banking or home shopping and things like that. But there is SCVO criteria in terms of the training levels that you want to bring individuals up to, and we are have our managers going on those sessions. I think it is on September. There's 3 sessions, I think, in this month for managers, and then the actual digital champion training, which is for the frontline workers, is taking place in November. There's a session that the SCVO are running for us in November. So that will hopefully increase the provision across the council of staff that are digital champions that are able to support our communities in all areas of our communities. And again, because we've got LEAD and PCAVs and others on the group, their staff and their managers have all been invited to these sessions as well, along with council staff.
Thank you, Alan. Fiona, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the update. That's great.
Thank you. And I have a question from Councillor Duff, and I see no other questions in the chat, although it seems my chat isn't picking up everybody's input. So when Councillor Duff has finished, if anybody else wants to ask a question, please just speak. Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. I think my question is also for Mr Taylor. It's on page 181 or page 15 of the papers. It's to do with the replacement social care case management system, and it says there that the Northgate Swift management system has been withdrawn from the marketplace and a new system won't be in place until 2023. I just wondered if Mr Taylor could give us comfort about any additional risks to the system that might bring about that's been covered. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely, Councillor Duff. Again, there is a board that is managing the replacement of the replacement social care system, obviously a replacement for the existing OLM system, which is Swift. There was a business case approved by elected members in terms of the capital budget a number of years ago now. We are at the procurement stage, and the board is chaired by Jackie Pepper and has a number of reps from Education and Children's Services and adult social work. So the risks are being monitored on a regular basis through that board. So we are comfortable that we are managing the process. Obviously, with all of these things, there has been delays in the procurement to date, and so we need to obviously get through the procurement stage, select a provider, and then we will be on into the process of implementing a change between the current system and the new system.
Thank you.
Thank you both. I don't envy you the procurement process, having in the past had to procure exactly that type of system myself, and procurement's actually the easy bit. I hate to tell you that. The transition to a new system is actually the most challenging of the lot, so good luck with that. I don't see any other questions, and I don't hear anybody else wishing to raise a question, so thank you to the officers and to the people who raised questions. And can we now note this report? Silence, of course, is consent or agreement. Thank you very much. So that report is now agreed or noted. We now move on to paper 9, which is the corporate workforce plan for 2018-21. And I would ask Karen Donaldson to introduce this report, please. Karen.
Thank you, Convener. Again, I have a colleague from Human Resources who has been instrumental in pulling together this review report. And this, of course, is a review of the last corporate workforce plan, which was approved by Council back in 2018, and we were keen to allow the Scrutiny Committee the opportunity to review what has happened over the last 3 years, because of course Council approved the new corporate workforce plan earlier this year. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Camelia Judge, who will take committee through the key highlights. Thank you.
Thank you, Camelia.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Convener. Good afternoon, councillors. So I'm pleased to introduce the Corporate Workforce Plan 2018-21. So the plan identified key workforce planning challenges during the period and initiatives to address these, and priorities for action under 4 key themes: focus on culture, attracting, retaining and developing talent, healthy working lives and fair work. Significant progress has been made in achieving the actions set out within the plan. Highlights include our Learn 2 programmes, which supported employees to change their careers to key occupational areas, including teaching and early years. The introduction of a health and wellbeing framework to support employees through ill health prevention, early intervention and building resilience, whilst also recognising that health and wellbeing is more than just physical health, with a greater emphasis on mental and financial wellbeing, and our focus on reducing the amount of fixed term contracts to create greater security for our employees. However, no one anticipated that we would face a global pandemic that has tested and challenged the resilience of individuals and organisations. So it's recognised that some work was interrupted and delayed as a result of the pandemic, and some areas were accelerated, for example, our digital skills and use of technology. Workforce planning has never been more critical than during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we needed to reprioritise work and retask staff to focus on a role as a Category 1 responder, providing essential services to the most vulnerable in our communities. Our employees stepped up to the challenges they faced, went above and beyond all expectations, demonstrating resilience and adapting rapidly to new ways of working. Our people are our most important asset, and we continue to focus on supporting our employees' health and well-being as we live with, excuse me, and recover from the pandemic. And through our Corporate Workforce Plan 2021 to 23, we'll build on our approach to workforce planning and support our workforce to ensure we continue to evolve and deliver our services to our citizens and communities. Going forward, we also plan to report progress of the Corporate Workforce Plan actions to committee on an annual basis. Karen, myself and colleagues in HR welcome your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camelia. We'll open now for questions. I have a question from Councillor Parrott. Andrew.
Thank you very much, Convener. I'm on page 200 of our pack, the infographic relating to our changing workforce profile. And I noticed the figures that the workforce has increased by approximately 4% over the time period in question. That's some 204 posts. And it says the main contributor to that increase is the early years scheme. My question is the early years scheme actually not just the main contributor, but the majority contributor? And can I be told if it's true that, if you like, the majority of that increase in the workforce relates to areas where our grants from Scottish Government in terms of budget, if you like, are baselined? Those increase in posts are in baseline funding. Thank you.
Camelia or Karen, which of you want to answer that?
I'm quite happy to answer that question, Convener. Yes, you are correct, Councillor Parrott. The bulk of the explanation for the increase in numbers is attributable to the expansion of early years, and there was significant additional funding provided to the Council for that on a recurring basis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if I can just have a sort of a slightly more frivolous supplementary, the little sort of picture related to the point about the number of employees aged over 60, I have no idea what that little picture is supposed to represent. If somebody could illuminate me, I'd be very grateful.
What page is that on, Andrew?
Page 200.
I don't think it has any significance. It was just a chosen image just for that. So there's no deep and hidden meaning there at all, Councillor Parrott.
I'm glad to know it, because if there was, I was missing it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any? If there are no other questions, then I have one question, if I may. Now I've lost my place going looking. Oh, Councillor Stewart, you have a question. Would you like to state your question now?
Thanks, Convener. I know it probably wasn't in the plan that was approved in 2018, but during 2018, we would have, as a council, approved the joint working agreement for our staff with NHS Tayside staff through the Health and Social Care Partnership, and I just wondered where we were with getting that implemented by NHS Tayside.
Councillor Stewart, I don't have any further updates to what I've advised committee before. Or in terms of the joint working agreement, it is still a topic of discussion. HR colleagues across NHS have been focused on other matters latterly, but it remains an ambition for Perth and Kinross Council to pursue that, because we believe it's the best way to ensure that our staff within an integrated environment are managed appropriately and supported appropriately.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Colin?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's an ongoing issue.
I'm not sure if your questions are ever fully answered somehow. I have, if there are no other questions, then I have a question or two, Karen, if I may. It's really around fair work, and I want to commend you on some of the work that's been done in that area. I'm particularly interested though in the introduction of a guaranteed interview for care experienced young people for modern apprenticeships. And I'm wondering, you were able to say in previous bullet points that you were able to, that some young people were employed by PKC on the autism spectrum, and others had some achievement, but there's no outcome from that particular piece of work. And I'm just wondering how many of the young people or care experienced young people actually succeeded in gaining modern apprenticeships.
Councillor McCall, I think Camelia would be closer to the modern apprenticeship programme to be able to respond to that question. Camelia?
Okay, thank
you. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, convener, for that question. So on our applicants, so 13.9% of our applicants for modern apprenticeships stated that they were care experienced, and 10% of vacancies were filled by young people who they were care experienced. And the national average is 1.7, so we are performing significantly higher than the national average in terms of our approach to care experienced young people.
Okay, that's very welcome news. Thank you very much indeed. And I think there are no more questions then for this paper, so can we all note this paper? Thank you. So now we move on to to paper 10. It's the FOI performance report. And Gillian Walker is going to present this report.
Thank you, convener. Excuse me. So I'm pleased to present the Freedom of Information report for 2020-21 to the committee. This report demonstrates that despite the continuing challenges of the pandemic, the Council has maintained its commitment to transparency. There was a reduction in performance in our response times within statutory timescales, which was largely attributable to changes in legislation which took place in response to the pandemic during the first quarter of last year, the last financial year. Although there was a reduction in the number of requests received during the year, we still responded to almost 80% of requests on time. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Gillian on the FOI report? There doesn't seem to be. Oh, who's that? No? Oh, here we go. Councillor Parrott.
Thank you very much again, convener. I noticed that, if you like, there's been a drop in the number of FOI requests made in this year compared with previous years. Has the time needed to be spent on those questions decreased as well, or have they been more difficult questions in a sense? Thank you.
There was a steep reduction in the number of requests received, particularly during the first 3 months of the pandemic. During April, May and June last year, there was a really large reduction, and that was reflected across all sectors in Scotland who are subject to freedom of information legislation. Since then, the numbers have picked up again gradually. We have received a number of very complex requests in relation to the Council's response to the pandemic, which have required a great deal of work across the Council. I would say moving into this year, it's back to business as usual, with the same mix of very straightforward requests and extremely large and complex requests. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
I suppose what I'm wanting to tease out really is, to me, it's not just important the overall number, but in a sense the resource expended on coping with that number. And I'm wondering whether over time the resource we're having to dedicate to Freedom of Information Act is relatively static, or is it in fact rising? Thank you.
The team who deal with freedom of information requests also deal with subject access requests, which are requests for personal information made under data protection legislation. And we also deal with complaints work as well. So while there was a slight reduction in the number of, well, a substantial reduction, in fact, the number of FOI requests overall last year, that was more than compensated for by a large increase in the number of subject access requests we received. So the resources that we have continue to be very well used, and there is in fact a growing workload overall within the team if you take all our areas of work into account.
Okay, thank you. That answers the question for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Gillian. I don't see any other questions in the chat box, so thank Gillian for presenting this paper to us today, and I will ask the committee to note the report. Thank you. So the final paper for today is the Council Complaints Performance Report, and Gillian, I think you're up again on that one.
I am indeed. Thank you very much, Convener. So this is a combined report on the Council's complaints handling performance over both 2019-20 and 2020-21 after pandemic related issues meant that it wasn't possible for us to present a report last year. So the two reports together show that the Council's complaint handling procedure is robust and fit for purpose, even during the circumstances we've all experienced over the last 18 months or so. Work is continuing to encourage staff to recognise and record complaints at as early a stage of the process as possible. We've introduced a new complaint system this year, and there's also a new complaints procedure which places an even greater emphasis on resolving complaints as early as possible. The committee may be aware of the recent retirement of Donald Henderson, who, in addition to his other roles, also managed the Council's corporate complaints function. Joy McLaughlin, who's a very experienced officer who was working in communities at the Council until recently, has recently taken up a post as corporate complaints team leader, and she'll be taking forward the implementation of the new procedure. And I'm happy once again to answer any questions the committee has in relation to these two reports.
Does anyone have any questions? I don't see anything in the chat box. It's quite unusual. Usually we do get questions about this. Well, if there are no questions, then can I ask everyone to note the report, please?
Noted.
Thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of the formal business for today. I want to thank everybody for their attendance and for their questions, and all the officers for their time and their full responses. A couple of points I'd just like to make at the end. We discussed earlier on that we should look at, when we're having presentations in future from the ALIOs, that we should have some sort of economic impact assessment on both Horsecross and on Culture Perth and Kinross, particularly in Horsecross and related to internal decisions that may have resulted in cancelled conference bookings. So I think that would, and Fiona Robertson is committed to working with the team to do that. Any unanswered questions that weren't able to be answered today, they should be recorded in the minute, that the questions, so that we can at least ensure that they've been answered, and any answer should be circulated to all committee members. And finally, I think there's a briefing to be held on, there's too many bits of papers around, the poverty action plan, not just child poverty, but adult poverty as well. So we look forward to seeing that, and I'm assuming that would be for all elected members. So I don't think there's any other business to discuss or any other points to raise. Then I will call this meeting to a close and wish you all a very pleasant afternoon.